Hey there, tonight we're slipping back to explore why being a medieval cobbler was no fairy tale, but rather a grim reality where every shoe was a step away from back-breaking toil. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's the crack of dawn, and you're already awake, because in the medieval world, sleep is a luxury reserved for the wealthy or the dead. You, my friend, are a cobbler, a shaper of souls, a mender of many, but a king of none. Welcome to your daily grind, a life where your closest companion is not a person, but the trusty all you clutch like a lifeline. Now let's talk cash, or the sad excuse for it you get to call a wage. A few shillings a week, that's your lot. Yes, you heard me right. A handful of shillings, which might not even buy you a decent pint of mead after you've paid for bread and the ever-looming rent. The exact amount varies, of course, depending on your skills and the whim of the market, but we're talking about the kind of money that makes today's minimum wage look like a lottery win. To make those shillings stretch, you're cranking out shoes faster than rabbits multiply. Think about it. In a year, you might need to produce upwards of 300 pairs just to keep your belly full and your landlord at bay. Each shoe is a little piece of art, sure, but they're also a ticket to another day without starving. So, while the gentry might think of shoes as fashion to you, they are survival. Let's not romanticize the workspace either. Forget a gleaming workshop lined with tools. Your reality is a corner of your drafty, straw-littered home. The windows, if there are any, are less for letting in light and more for letting in the cold. And those drafty walls, they whistle a tune you wish you could ignore. Your throne is a three-legged stool, your workbench a makeshift plank. The glamour is palpable, isn't it? The tools of your trade are simple yet essential. The last, a foot-shaped form, is your blueprint for each shoe. And let's not forget the awl, a pointed instrument that's seen more action than a knight's sword. Then there's the cobbler's knife, a tool so versatile it could slice a tomato or cut leather with equal precision. But don't get too attached. Tools wear out, and replacing them isn't cheap. And amidst all this, the social ladder isn't particularly kind. You're not quite at the bottom. That dubious honor belongs to serfs, but you're far from the top. Cobblers like you are the backbone of society, yet you're often overlooked by the history books, much like the arch support in your shoes. Here's the kicker. Despite the grind, there's a certain pride in crafting something with your own hands. Each shoe tells a story, not just of the wearer, but of your labor and skill. Your shoes might not get you riches, but they do earn you respect in the village. People depend on you to keep their feet dry and warm, and in medieval times that's no small feat. Let's debunk a myth while we're at it. The Middle Ages weren't all dark and dreary. Sure, life was tough, but there was also laughter, music, and a sense of community. Your fellow tradespeople, the blacksmiths, weavers, and bakers, form a network of mutual support. You trade favors and share news, maybe even a cup of something strong on a good day. In this world, every day is a hustle, a dance between necessity and craft. You are a cobbler, a creator of footwear, a survivor in a world that often forgets the people who walk on its streets. And while we can romanticize the idea of the humble cobbler, let's not forget the real grit and grind behind each carefully stitched shoe. As you lace up your medieval boots and step out into the muddy streets of your town, let's talk about where you, the cobbler, fit into the grand tapestry of medieval society. Spoiler alert, it's not at the top, nor even comfortably in the middle. In this medieval pecking order, you're somewhere below the merchants and above the peasants, a rung on the ladder that's as slippery as the grime-covered cobblestones you walk on. Medieval towns were like the original social media platforms. Everyone was obsessed with status, and not everyone made it to the top of the feed. At the top, you've got the nobles and wealthy merchants, the medieval influencers with their castles and fancy fabrics. Below them, the middle-class folks, the tradesmen who owned businesses and had a bit of coin to jingle. And then there's you, the cobbler, an artisan whose role is essential, yet often overlooked, like the Wi-Fi router of the Middle Ages. Despite being on your feet all day, cobblers rarely got the same respect as those with wealth or titles. You were the sort of artisan who crafted necessity rather than luxury, which meant your social standing was as stable as a pair of worn-out sandals. You made the shoes that everyone needed, from the lowliest serf to the wealthiest lord. But while you had a foot in every social class, your own social mobility often felt more like a treadmill than a staircase. Now, let's delve into why cobblers were considered lower-class artisans despite their crucial role. In a world where appearances mattered more than a LinkedIn profile, your work was seen as functional rather than fashionable. You weren't spinning silk or trading spices. You were getting your hands dirty with leather and nails. And while your craftsmanship was valued, the societal hierarchy was more about who you knew than what you did. Think of it as the medieval version of networking, minus the business cards. The guild system was another beast entirely. These were the medieval trade unions, but they had more rules than a board game night with that one friend who insists on reading the manual. Guilds controlled everything from the quality of goods to the prices you could charge. And if you weren't part of one, you were like a medieval freelancer, flexible but often struggling. For cobblers, joining a guild could mean better protection and more business, but it also meant fees, regulations, and a hierarchy within the hierarchy. It was the classic catch-22. You needed the guild to succeed, but being in one didn't guarantee success. Guilds were powerful, sure, but they were also like the high school cliques of the medieval world. They had their own rivalries, and if you were a cobbler trying to go solo, you were essentially the kid who opted for a home lunch instead of cafeteria offerings. Independence was a double-edged sword, great for self-expression, but often leaving you isolated when times got tough. Societal pressures weren't just about where you fit in the hierarchy. Expectations were like the medieval version of Yelp reviews. They were everywhere, and they could make or break you. You needed to maintain a reputation for quality if you hoped to retain customers. A single pair of poorly crafted shoes could send your business into a tailspin faster than a bad tweet goes viral today. And yet, there was a curious romance to it all. The idea of being a cobbler, crafting shoes that might one day walk down the aisle or tread the dirt paths of a crusade, held a certain poetic appeal. Your work was literally the foundation of every journey, every adventure. Yet, the reality was far more prosaic. Long hours, little pay, and social standing that felt more like a worn heel than a comfortable arch. You see, even in this gritty medieval world, there was a sense of pride in being a cog in the machine, a maker of things rather than just a user. The cobbler's life might not have been glamorous, but it was honest work in a society that often valued appearances over authenticity. You were a craftsman, a creator, and in a small way, an artist. And while your role was often overlooked, without you, the lords and ladies would be stumbling around barefoot, and that's a thought that could bring a sly smile to any cobbler's face. So, as you tie the last knot and send your latest pair of shoes out into the world, there's a quiet satisfaction in knowing that while you might not be at the top of the social ladder, your work keeps the world moving, literally. And while the guilds and nobles might have the power, it's the cobblers who truly understand the value of a solid foundation. Keep that in mind as you navigate the muddy waters of medieval society, one step at a time. And speaking of muddy waters, let's dive into the cobbler's supply chain, a labyrinth more twisted than a medieval mystery novel. Leather, the lifeblood of your trade, was not just any material. It was the holy grail of shoemaking. But getting your hands on it, well, that was a journey worthy of its own epic saga. First, let's talk about where leather comes from. In the medieval world, it wasn't as simple as hitting up your local craft store. Nope, you were looking at a lengthy process that started with a cow and ended with a hide tougher than your average tax collector. Tanners, the unsung heroes, or villains, depending on your perspective of this tale, were responsible for transforming raw hides into workable leather. This process involved enough steps to make your head spin, including soaking, liming, fleshing, and tanning, all of which took weeks, if not months. Now, here's the kicker. Leather wasn't cheap. A single hide could set you back a few pence up to several shillings, depending on the quality and thickness. To put that in perspective, a skilled cobbler might earn about 6 shillings a week if they were lucky, and cranked out shoes like a medieval factory. So, buying leather was like placing a bet at the medieval horse races. You hoped your investment would pay off in the form of sturdy, sellable shoes. But wait, it gets better. Let's introduce the local feudal lord into the mix, because no medieval story is complete without a noble throwing their weight around. These lords often controlled the lands where cattle were raised and hides were produced. In many cases, they decided who could buy leather, and at what price, effectively turning cobblers into medieval negotiators. Imagine haggling over leather prices while knowing that a displeased baron could boot you out of business faster than you could say serfdom. And let's not forget about the guilds. Oh yes, those delightful medieval support networks had their fingers in the pie, too. They regulated the quality and pricing of leather to ensure no cobbler was undercutting his brethren. This was supposed to maintain a fair market, but it often felt more like a straitjacket, binding you to rules stiffer than the leather itself. The supply chain was further complicated by environmental factors. Picture this. A wet year could lead to a dearth of cattle, meaning fewer hides turned into leather. Or worse, a disease outbreak could decimate livestock populations, sending leather prices skyrocketing. In such times, cobblers had to get creative or face financial ruin. This might involve repurposing old leather, or, in some cases, resorting to less desirable materials like cloth or wood for parts of the shoe. Talk about making do with what you've got. Political factors also played a role. Wars, for instance, could disrupt trade routes, cutting off access to crucial resources. If your town was caught between battling factions, you could kiss your leather shipments goodbye, as they were either delayed or redirected to the armies. And if your leather was rerouted to make armor rather than shoes, you could count on more than just financial hardship. We're talking about the medieval version of a supply chain nightmare. Yet, amid these challenges, there was a certain romance to the cobbler's life. Perhaps it was the thrill of the chase, the relentless pursuit of materials, and the satisfaction of finally acquiring that precious leather. Or maybe it was the sense of community, the shared struggle with fellow tradesmen who knew all too well the trials of the trade. Whatever it was, the cobbler's life was as much a tale of resilience as it was of craftsmanship. And let's not gloss over the creativity involved. Cobblers had to be resourceful, stretching every scrap of leather, making sure nothing went to waste. Each hide was measured with the precision of a medieval engineer, and every cut was calculated to maximize yield. This was sustainability before it was trendy, an art form honed by necessity. In this world of limited resources and constant negotiation, cobblers developed a keen sense of adaptability. One day you might be crafting a pair of boots for a noble, the next, mending a farmer's worn-out shoes with whatever scraps you could scrounge. It was a balancing act worthy of applause, requiring not just skill, but also a sharp mind to navigate the economic and political minefield. So, as you sit in your workshop, surrounded by scraps of leather and the smell of tanned hide, you understand the true cost of your craft. It's not just the shillings spent on materials, but the time, the effort, and the constant dance with uncertainty. Yet, despite the odds, you persevere, driven by the desire to create something tangible, something enduring. And in a world where everything from politics to the weather could affect your livelihood, that was a feat worthy of any cobbler's pride. While the myth of the cobbler is often one of simplicity, the reality is anything but. It's a tale of survival against the odds, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to adapt and thrive amidst adversity. So, as you lace up those medieval boots and prepare to face another day in the life of cobbler, remember this. Your role may be humble, but your impact is profound. With every shoe you craft, you're not just providing a service. You're keeping the wheels of medieval society in motion, one step at a time. Speaking of keeping the medieval world in motion, let's lace up the worn leather boots of myth and reality, shall we? You see, when most people think of cobblers, they imagine a quaint, almost magical profession. You know, the kind of place where little elves sneak in at night and finish your work for you. Ah, the cobbler's elves. Those tiny, industrious creatures who supposedly made shoes while the cobbler slept. If only right. But here's the kicker. The reality was far less fantastical and far more grueling. The legend of the cobbler's elves is one of those charming tales that paints the profession in a whimsical light. The story goes that a poor cobbler, unable to finish his orders, goes to bed only to find his work miraculously completed by morning. Heartwarming, yes. Accurate. Not even close. The truth is, medieval cobblers had neither the luxury of elves nor the time to wait for miracles. They worked tirelessly, often from dawn until dusk, stitching and hammering away in dimly lit workshops. It was less fairy tale and more a test of endurance. If we peek into the records from the medieval cities, let's say London or Paris, you'll find that cobblers were some of the hardest working artisans around. Imagine spending your days hunched over a wooden bench, your hands stained with the dye and glue that bound leather to sole. Forget ergonomic chairs or wrist braces. The only support you had was a stiff back and a determination to make it through the day. And let's not ignore the physical toll. Repetitive stress injuries were as common as the dirt on the streets you walked. The average cobbler's workday could stretch for 12 hours or more, particularly during busy seasons when orders piled up. And while modern workplaces have coffee breaks, cobblers had only short interludes to rest their aching hands. Toss in the fact that medieval towns didn't exactly have stellar lighting, and you've got a situation where squinting by candlelight was part of the daily grind. Eye strain was just another occupational hazard. Now, about those pesky myths. Why did they persist? Well, part of it is the human penchant for romanticizing the past, especially when the reality is a bit too gritty for comfort. Who wants to hear about the back-breaking labor and the perpetual struggle when you can weave tales of magical helpers and enchanted workshops? It's a narrative that sells, and let's face it, stories of elves are far more entertaining than tales of sweat and toil. But let's not dismiss these myths entirely. They do serve a purpose. They remind us of the allure of the craft, the idea that something as humble as a shoe can hold wonder and mystery. Yet the real magic wasn't in the nocturnal visitations of mythical beings, but in the cobblers themselves, ordinary people who turned raw materials into something both functional and essential. It's the kind of transformation that, in its way, is no less magical than any fairy tale. Economically, cobblers were caught in a perpetual balancing act. They had to keep prices low enough to attract customers, yet high enough to cover costs and eke out a profit. The price of a pair of shoes could range from a few pence for a simple design to several shillings for a more ornate pair, perhaps for a local lord or merchant. The challenge was finding that sweet spot where you could make a living without pricing yourself out of the market. And then there's the matter of competition. The guilds, while they controlled quality and set standards, also ensured that no one cobbler could monopolize the market. It was a medieval version of sharing the wealth, albeit with strict rules and hierarchies. For those on the outside looking in, the guilds were both gatekeepers and guardians, offering protection but demanding loyalty and fees. As for social factors, cobblers were artisans, but they didn't possess the same cachet as, say, a silversmith or a painter. Their work was seen as essential but not luxurious, necessary but not noteworthy. It was a profession that straddled the line between skilled labor and service industry, a vital cog in the wheel of society, but rarely celebrated. This, of course, speaks to the broader societal norms of the time, where one's worth was often tied to wealth and status, rather than skill and contribution. So where does that leave us? With a profession that is both romanticized and overlooked, essential yet unsung. Cobblers were the unsung heroes of their day, crafting the very items that took people to market, to church, to war, and back home again. While the myths may paint a picture of magic and mystery, the reality was one of hard work, skill, and perseverance. In the end, the cobbler's life was one of contrasts, between myth and reality, craft and commerce, survival and art. It was a life where every stitch told a story, not just of the shoe, but of the cobbler's own journey. And while the stories of elves are charming, the real tale is one of human endeavor, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things with little more than leather, thread, and sheer determination. So, next time you hear a fairy tale about industrious elves or magical workshops, remember the cobblers who toiled away without the help of fantastical creatures. They were the real artisans, the true makers of shoes that carried the world forward, one step at a time. And isn't that a story worth telling, with all its grit and grind, magic or no magic? Keep that in mind as we march onward into the cobbled streets of history, because there's always more to discover beneath the soles of time. Now, let's lace up those leather boots, because we're about to take a final stroll through the cobbler's legacy, a story stitched with resilience and sewn into the very fabric of medieval life. This isn't just about shoes, my friend. It's about understanding what it meant to be a cog in the medieval machine. Cobblers, after all, were more than mere artisans. They were survivalists in an era that made today's gig economy look like a cakewalk. Think about it. Cobblers operated in a world where the line between survival and ruin was thinner than the souls they crafted. They were the original entrepreneurs, navigating a market dictated by the whims of weather, war, and let's not forget, the local lord's latest whimsy. In a time where uncertainty was the only certainty, cobblers had no choice but to adapt or become yesterday's news. Sound familiar? That's because their challenges echo the struggles of today's small businesses. Let's break it down economically. In a medieval town, the cobblers' daily earnings might resemble pocket change compared to their noble counterparts. A shilling here, a pence there. It was a balancing act worthy of a tightrope walker. Yet, these artisans were the backbone of local economies. They took raw materials, often purchased at inflated prices thanks to the baron's monopoly, and transformed them into products everyone needed. In doing so, they kept the local economic wheel turning, a role not unlike the small businesses that form the backbone of today's communities. Politically, cobblers were at the mercy of those above them. Lords and guilds dictated not just the availability of materials, but also the prices they could charge. It was medieval trickle-down economics, where the only thing trickling down was the pressure to comply or perish. But don't mistake compliance for complacency. Cobblers were masters of negotiation, often bartering their skills for goods or favors, ensuring their place in the social pecking order. In this constant dance of survival, they demonstrated a resilience that would make a modern-day CEO proud. Socially, cobblers were the unsung heroes. They might not have been the life of the medieval party, but they were essential, crafting the very items that enabled everyone else to attend those grand feasts and market days. Their work was practical, not luxurious, yet it was indispensable. Cobblers were the quiet craftsmen of community, their reputations built on quality and reliability, traits that, even today, define successful businesses. Now, let's talk legacy. The cobbler's tale is one of perseverance, an unyielding spirit in the face of adversity. It's a narrative that transcends time, echoing in the stories of today's small business owners who, much like their medieval counterparts, must navigate volatile markets, unpredictable supply chains, and economic pressures. The cobbler's legacy teaches us that while the tools and materials may change, the core challenges of running a business remain the same: innovation, adaptability, and a dash of good old-fashioned grit. And what about the myths? Well, they serve as a reminder that even in the harshest of realities, there's room for a little magic. While the cobbler's elves might never have existed, the myth speaks to the human desire for wonder amidst the mundane. It's the same allure that captivates us today, whether we're marveling at the latest tech gadget or a startup's innovative twist on an old idea. In the cobbler's world, as in ours, there's an enduring fascination with the possibility of transformation, with turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. So, as we lace up our metaphorical boots and step back into the present, let's carry with us the lessons of the cobbler's trade. They remind us that beneath the layers of history lies a story of human resilience and ingenuity. A story that, despite the passage of centuries, remains as relevant today as it was in those drafty, leather-strewn workshops. Cobblers may not have had elves, but they had something even better: the ability to adapt, survive, and leave an enduring footprint on history. And in a world that's constantly changing, isn't that the real magic? In the dusty cradle of ancient Greece, the city-state of Sparta was brewing something downright peculiar, a society that would make your gym instructor look like a couch potato. Around the 8th century BCE, Sparta wasn't just a place on the map. It was the embodiment of a lifestyle choice, the ancient equivalent of a viral fitness challenge, but with fewer kale smoothies and more blood, sweat, and tears. Sparta's peculiar journey into becoming the most formidable military powerhouse in ancient Greece didn't start with a bang. Rather, it was the result of a series of social, political, and economic nudges, some of them more like aggressive shoves, that shaped its destiny. First, let's talk geography. Sparta was nestled in the region of Laconia, in the southeastern corner of the Peloponnesian Peninsula. Picture a place where stunning mountain vistas meet fertile valleys, a postcard-worthy landscape with one minor problem. It was a prime target for invasions. The Spartans, being practical folks, realized pretty early on that they had two choices: become incredibly skilled at defending their perfect piece of paradise or hand over the keys and let someone else have all the fun. Spoiler alert, they chose the former. Now, you might wonder how a bunch of people living in such a picturesque, albeit strategically vulnerable, area developed a society so fixated on military prowess. The answer lies in a delightful cocktail of necessity and opportunity. You see, Sparta was surrounded by neighbors who were less interested in playing nice and more interested in playing conqueror. The Messenians, for example, were particularly enthusiastic about the latter, leading to the First Messenian War around 743 BCE. Big mistake, Messenians. Sparta not only fought them off, but also decided to make them their helots, essentially state-owned serfs, turning them into the workforce that would support the Spartan military machine. Imagine working your fields while your overlords were busy perfecting the art of war. Talk about a hostile takeover. Speaking of the helots, let's address the not-so-minor detail of what the helot system meant for Spartan society. The helots were the economic backbone, allowing Spartan citizens the luxury of focusing their energy on military training rather than, farming or weaving. It was a clever system if you ignored the rampant oppression and occasional revolts. Details. Helots outnumbered the Spartans significantly, which meant the Spartans had to be ever watchful, not just for external threats, but for internal uprisings too. This constant state of alertness fed into their militaristic culture, creating a society as tightly wound as a vintage Swiss watch. Now, about that romanticized Spartan austerity and discipline, it's tempting to imagine a society of stoic warriors living simply and training tirelessly, but let's not gloss over the brutal reality. Yes, Spartans were disciplined, but they were also products of a harsh and unforgiving social system. Spartan boys were taken from their families at the tender age of 7 to begin the agoge, a grueling education and training regimen that would make a modern boot camp look like a spa retreat. They learned survival skills, combat techniques, and the fine art of enduring hardship. And by hardship, I mean enduring hunger, exposure, and the occasional beating, character building, Spartan style. Despite the allure of the Spartan warrior image chiseled, disciplined, and utterly devoted to the state, it wasn't all glory and honor. The political system was a peculiar mix of monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy, with 2 kings sharing power, a council of elders, and an assembly of citizens. It was like a political potluck where everyone brought a dish, but no one really liked what the other was serving. Yet, somehow, it worked, probably because everyone was too busy training to argue much. The legendary Spartan discipline came with a hefty price tag, a society where individual expression took a backseat to collective strength. Spartans were expected to live frugally, speak little, and fight hard. The Spartan mirage of simplicity and strength, while partially true, often glosses over the harsh realities they faced. The austere lifestyle was as much a necessity as it was a choice. In a world where your neighbors were as likely to invade as to offer you a cup of sugar, being prepared was just common sense. So, as we dig deeper into the origins of the Spartan military, remember this. The legend of Sparta is both more and less than it seems. It's a tale of a society that chose to shape itself around the demands of war, turning necessity into virtue and discipline into an art form. But beneath the bronzed veneer of the Spartan warrior lies a complex web of social, economic, and political factors that made Sparta the formidable force it became. And if you think this is the most intense part of their story, just wait. Things are about to get even more Spartan. As Sparta plunged headfirst into the 7th and 6th centuries BCE, it wasn't just about hardening kids in the agoge like little warriors in training. Nope, it was about crafting a military system so robust that even their enemies would break out in a nervous sweat. The agoge wasn't just a school, it was a crucible, and it started at age 7, an age where most kids today are mastering the fine art of finger painting or learning how not to spill their lunch. Spartan boys, however, were busy learning survival skills and how to endure hardship, which, in Spartan terms, meant thriving on a diet of minimal food and maximum discipline. Now, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of the agoge, that infamous Spartan boot camp. It wasn't just a place where boys learned to fight. It was an all-encompassing system that shaped them into ideal citizens, at least by Spartan standards. The training was rigorous, with a focus on endurance, cunning, and loyalty to the state. Picture this: a daily routine of physical exercise, weapons training, and mock battles, with a side of music and dance for good measure. And by music, I mean the rhythmic clanging of shields and dance, as in synchronized battle formations. The ultimate goal: to create warriors who could withstand anything life, or the battlefield, threw at them. But here's where it gets economically fascinating. As the Spartan youth were busy transforming into lean, mean fighting machines, someone had to foot the bill. The Spartan state needed to maintain a permanent warrior class, and surprise, they weren't exactly running bake sales to cover costs. The economic demands were immense. Supporting a standing army required substantial resources, meaning the Helots, the subjugated population, were taxed to the hilt. These poor souls worked the land, providing food and resources for the Spartans, who were too busy perfecting their spear thrusts to engage in mundane activities like farming. And let's not gloss over the logistical demands. Equipping a warrior wasn't cheap. Each Spartan hoplite, those iconic heavily armed soldiers, needed a panoply of gear: a helmet, breastplate, greaves, shield, and spear. We're talking about equipment that would cost a small fortune, even by ancient standards. Estimates suggest that arming a single hoplite could equate to several months' worth of wages for a skilled laborer. Multiply that by an entire army, and you have yourself a hefty tab, one that required a constant influx of resources. Economic system supporting this martial obsession was a precarious balancing act. The Helots outnumbered the Spartans dramatically, with estimates suggesting a ratio of 7-1. This imbalance meant that the Spartans had to be constantly vigilant, not just for external threats, but also for the very real possibility of a slave revolt. Imagine trying to keep your house in order when your servants outnumber you and aren't exactly thrilled about their employment conditions. The Spartans needed their military to be a well-oiled machine, not just to fend off invaders, but to maintain internal control. Irony alert. The system designed to protect the Spartans from outside threats also kept them in a perpetual state of paranoia. Now, about that Spartan warrior ethos. The myth of the stoic, disciplined Spartan soldier has endured for centuries, but let's peel back the layers. Yes, they were disciplined, but this was a discipline born from necessity, not choice. The Spartan way of life was less about valor and more about survival. The much-lauded simplicity and austerity were, in reality, a byproduct of the constant need to be battle-ready. Spartan society was structured to ensure its survival, plain and simple. The romanticized vision of the noble Spartan warrior, single-mindedly devoted to his city-state, might have been more about survival than glory. The Spartan military system was a marvel of efficiency and effectiveness, but it came at a cost, a societal trade-off where individual freedom was sacrificed at the altar of collective security. In a world where being unprepared could mean the difference between life and death, the Spartans chose a path that left little room for anything but military prowess. But hey, if you're going to be stuck in a constant state of readiness, you might as well look good doing it right. As we continue to unravel the Spartan story, keep in mind that the image of the Spartan warrior is both a myth and a reality. It's a story worth telling, not just for its legendary valor, but for the stark truths that lie beneath the surface. And while the allure of the Spartan ethos may shine brightly in the annals of history, the reality was often as grim as it was glorious. But don't worry, we're not done yet. The tale of Sparta is far from over, and there's plenty more Spartan intrigue to dissect. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the Spartan saga, exploring the nuances of a society built on the edge of a spear. As Sparta sharpened its spears and flexed its military muscles, the 5th century BCE rolled around with an opportunity that would cement its reputation in the annals of history. Enter stage left, the Persian Wars, where the Spartans had the chance to put their warrior ethos to the ultimate test. This was the era when Sparta wasn't just a military machine. It was the rock star of the Greek world, headlining a bloody concert of battles that even Hollywood couldn't resist turning into blockbuster fodder. But if you're picturing 300 chiseled warriors in leather speedos, hold that thought. Hollywood might have added a touch of creative license. Let's set the stage for Thermopylae in 480 BCE, one of the most iconic standoffs in military history. Picture a narrow pass between the mountains and the sea, where the Greeks, led by Spartan King Leonidas, faced down the massive Persian army led by Xerxes. Now, the numbers game here is key. Herodotus, our ancient gossip columnist, claims Xerxes' forces numbered in the millions. Modern historians, wielding calculators instead of abacuses, estimate around 100, 000 to 150, 000 Persian soldiers. On the other side, Leonidas commanded about 7,000 Greek troops, including his legendary 300 Spartans. That's a ratio that would make even the bravest reconsider their life choices. The strategic brilliance of Thermopylae lay in its geography. The narrow pass nullified the Persian numerical advantage, turning it into a battle of skill and endurance. Leonidas and his men held the pass for 3 days, a feat of military defiance that has echoed through time. But let's not sugarcoat it. This wasn't just about guts and glory. The Spartans, masters of phalanx warfare, used their tightly knit formation to maximum effect. It was less about brute strength and more about precision, discipline, and knowing how to make every swing of the sword count. Forget the romanticized notion of a free-for-all melee. This was a calculated chess match with deadly stakes. And speaking of stakes, let's address the economic backdrop. Spartan military machine wasn't just fueled by sheer willpower. Arming a hoplite wasn't cheap, and the cost of keeping a standing army ready for war was a constant burden. The Spartans required considerable resources to equip their soldiers with bronze helmets, breastplates, and those iconic round shields. We're talking about gear that would cost a small fortune by ancient standards, not to mention the logistical challenge of feeding and maintaining a force in the field. The Persian Wars weren't just a test of martial prowess. They were a financial and logistical gamble that could have bankrupted the state. As for Hollywood's portrayal of Thermopylae, let's take a moment to debunk some myths. The reality was less about capes and slow-motion spear throws, and more about grueling hand-to-hand combat in stifling conditions. The Spartans weren't alone in their stand, either. Greek allies from various city-states stood alongside them, sharing in both the glory and the grim reality. The romantic image of the noble Spartan warrior is stirring, but the truth was a messy, brutal affair that left little room for heroics. But why does Thermopylae matter beyond the cinematic flair? It was a masterclass in strategic delay, buying the Greek city-states precious time to prepare for the battles that would eventually turn the tide against Persia. It was a political move as much as a military one, a statement of defiance that rallied the Greek world. Leonidas' sacrifice wasn't just about a last stand. It was about sending a message that the Greeks wouldn't roll over in the face of Persian dominance. The diplomatic maneuvers that followed, including forging alliances and rallying troops, were as critical to the Greek cause as any sword thrust. And let's not overlook the aftermath. While Thermopylae was a Persian victory in the short term, the long game played out differently. The Battle of Salamis, a naval engagement that followed, saw the Greeks, led by Athenian strategy and Spartan muscle, deliver a decisive blow to the Persian fleet. The Spartans, true to form, played a central role in the land battles that followed, including the pivotal encounter at Plataea in 479 BCE, where a united Greek force finally sent Xerxes packing. It was a classic underdog story, but one built on calculated risks and strategic brilliance rather than sheer bravado. In the grand tapestry of history, the Spartan story during the Persian Wars is a blend of myth and reality, where the legend of 300 has to share the stage with the gritty details of military logistics, economic strain, and political gambits. The allure of the Spartan warrior remains irresistible, but the truth is a complex weave of discipline, necessity, and the ever-present shadow of survival. As we continue to unravel the Spartan saga, remember that beneath the bronze sheen lies a story as intricate as it is inspiring. A tale of a society that chose the spear not just as a weapon, but as a way of life. And the story doesn't end here, so keep your shields raised and your wits sharper as we march further into Spartan history. The heat of battle may have cooled, but the Spartan saga was far from over. After basking in the glow of their Persian war triumphs, Sparta found itself on a collision course with destiny, one that involved more than just blood and bronze. As the dust settled and the Greek world regained its breath, Sparta emerged as a dominant force in the Peloponnesian War, a conflict that pitted them against Athens in a protracted struggle for supremacy. But spoiler alert, this wasn't a tale of unending victory. In fact, it was more like watching a high-stakes poker game where everyone thought they had the winning hand. The Peloponnesian War, which raged from 431 to 404 BCE, was Sparta's crowning achievement and the beginning of its unraveling. Sure, they managed to defeat the Athenians and bring the mighty city to its knees, but at what cost? The Spartan triumph was like winning a marathon only to discover you'd lost your shoes somewhere along the way. Their victory came with a price tag that even the shrewdest Spartan accountants couldn't balance: a devastated economy, depleted manpower, and a political landscape as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty. The Spartan economy, already strained by the demands of a perpetual military state, took a hit during the war. The Helots, who kept the Spartan agricultural engine running, were increasingly difficult to control. Their population was less than thrilled about being stuck in the role of oppressed laborers, and their occasional revolts didn't exactly help Spartan stability. Couple this with the fact that Spartan citizens were more focused on sharpening their swords than plowing fields, and you've got a recipe for economic instability. The irony of a military powerhouse being undermined by its agricultural shortcomings isn't lost here. Now, here's where the story takes a twist. Post-war, Sparta tried its hand at empire building, but let's just say they weren't exactly naturals. The Spartans found themselves playing a political game they were ill-prepared for, like a heavyweight boxer trying to dance ballet. Their rigid social system, which thrived on discipline and austerity, struggled to adapt to the complex diplomatic landscape of post-war Greece. The Spartans' attempts at governing their newfound empire were marked by inefficiency and a lack of political savvy. Turns out, running a sprawling empire is a bit more complicated than managing a phalanx. Enter the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE, a pivotal moment that would make even the fiercest Spartans rethink their life choices. It was here that the myth of Spartan invincibility was shattered by the Thebans, led by the brilliant general Epaminondas. Now, let's talk numbers. The Spartan army, around 10,000 strong, faced a Theban force of roughly 7,000. In true Spartan fashion, they expected a quick and decisive victory. But Epaminondas had other plans. He employed an innovative tactic known as the oblique formation, concentrating his forces on one flank to break the Spartan line. It was a masterstroke of military strategy, and the Spartans found themselves on the wrong end of history. The defeat at Leuctra wasn't just a military setback. It was a seismic shift that rocked the very foundations of Spartan society. The loss exposed the vulnerabilities of a system that had once seemed unassailable. The Spartan army, once the gold standard of ancient military might, now appeared outdated in the face of evolving tactics and strategies. It was like watching a champion boxer get outmaneuvered by a nimble up-and-comer, one whose moves were both unexpected and devastatingly effective. Economically, Sparta was in no position to rebound quickly. Their rigid social hierarchy and reliance on a subjugated Helot population proved to be their undoing. With their military prowess called into question, the Spartans struggled to maintain their dominance. The Helot revolts became more frequent and more violent, exacerbating the already dire economic situation. Spartan citizens, once the epitome of martial dedication, found themselves caught in the throes of a society that was crumbling from within. But let's not forget the external pressures that compounded Spartan woes. The Greek world was changing, with city-states like Thebes and Athens reasserting their influence. New alliances were formed, and the balance of power shifted. Sparta, once the undisputed heavyweight champion, found itself sidelined in a rapidly evolving political landscape. Their rigid system, which had served them well in the past, now seemed as antiquated as a chariot in a world of cavalry. The decline of Sparta is a tale of hubris and inflexibility, of a society that failed to adapt to the changing tides of history. The allure of the Spartan legend remains, with its tales of valor and discipline, but the reality was a society caught in the grip of its own making. They had built their identity on the unyielding ideals of martial prowess and social order, only to be undone by the very rigidity they cherished. It's the classic cautionary tale of what happens when you put all your eggs in one basket and someone else invents the omelet. As the once mighty Spartans grappled with their newfound reality, the Greek world moved on, leaving Sparta to ponder its place in a world where military might was no longer the sole measure of greatness. The decline wasn't immediate, but it was inevitable, a slow erosion of power and prestige that mirrored the fading glory of the Spartan warrior ethos. Yet, even as the sun set on their dominance, the legacy of Sparta endured, a testament to the heights they reached and the depths they fell. So, as we wrap up this chapter, let's remember Sparta not just for its triumphs, but for its trials, a society that reached for the stars, only to find itself caught in the gravity of its own making. The Spartan story is far from over, and as we continue to explore the twists and turns of their history, one thing is clear. The tale of Sparta is as compelling as it is cautionary, a reflection of the eternal struggle between the allure of legend and the harshness of reality. Keep your eyes peeled, because the next chapter promises even more intrigue as we delve deeper into the Spartan legacy and its lasting impact on the ancient world. In the grand theatre of history, where the spotlight often falls on the dazzling and the daring, the tale of Sparta is one of both spectacle and sobering truth. Here was a society that, for a time, seemed to have cracked the code of invincibility, a place where the art of war was not just a profession, but a way of life. Yet, as the curtain falls on Sparta's golden era, we're left with a legacy that's as perplexing as it is powerful. How did a city-state that thrived on its military prowess end up as a cautionary tale of rigidity and decline? And more importantly, what can modern societies learn from this ancient powerhouse that traded the complexities of human existence for the simplicity of the spear? Let's start with the myth, the romanticized vision of Sparta that's been etched into the collective consciousness. Ah, the Spartans, those stoic warriors with their chiseled physiques and unwavering discipline, standing shoulder to shoulder in their phalanx formations, ready to take on the world. It's an image that's hard to resist, especially when you throw in a few slow-motion battle scenes and a rousing soundtrack. But beneath the bronze facade lies a reality that's far less glamorous. Sure, the Spartans were masters of war, but they were also prisoners of their own expectations. Their society was a finely tuned machine, designed to produce warriors at the expense of nearly everything else. Individual expression, sacrificed at the altar of collective strength. Economic diversification, unnecessary when your currency is spears and shields. And yet, despite the allure of this martial utopia, the cracks in the Spartan veneer were all too real. The very system that propelled them to greatness also sowed the seeds of their downfall. By focusing so intently on military might, Sparta neglected the softer, albeit equally important, aspects of societal well-being. Education, innovation, and cultural development took a backseat, while the state kept its eyes firmly on the horizon, ever watchful for the next threat. It's a bit like building a castle with no windows. Sure, it's fortified, but you miss out on all the sunlight. Now, let's talk economics, because nothing says reality check quite like a balance sheet. The Spartan economy was a precarious balancing act, propped up by the labor of the Helots. These subjugated people were the backbone of Spartan society, toiling away in the fields to ensure the citizens could focus on perfecting their warrior skills. But here's the kicker. Helots outnumbered Spartans by a staggering ratio. Some estimates suggest as much as 7-1. This meant that the Spartan military machine wasn't just a tool for external defense. It was also a means of internal control. The constant threat of Helot uprisings kept the Spartans in a perpetual state of paranoia, their society a pressure cooker of tension and unrest. And what about the political landscape? Sparta's rigid oligarchy, with its dual kingship and council of elders, was a political dinosaur in a world that was rapidly evolving. While it worked brilliantly in a land of small city-states, the system faltered when it came to managing larger territories and complex alliances. The Spartans were exceptional soldiers, but when it came to diplomacy, they were like a fish out of water, floundering in a sea of nuanced political maneuvering. They conquered Athens, only to find themselves unable to maintain control over their new empire, much like a dog that catches a car, and then realizes it has no idea what to do with it. So, what lessons can we glean from the rise and fall of Sparta? For starters, there's the importance of balance, something the Spartans, for all their prowess, never quite mastered. A society built solely on military strength is like a three-legged stool missing a leg. It's bound to topple eventually. Sparta's story is a reminder that true strength lies not just in the ability to wield a sword, but in the wisdom to know when to sheath it. It's about recognizing that power, unchecked and unbalanced, can be both a blessing and a curse. Moreover, Sparta's legacy prompts us to question the narratives we hold dear, particularly the ones that glorify martial valor without acknowledging the human cost. The romanticization of Spartan society, both in ancient times and in modern media, often glosses over the harsh realities of life in a state that demanded so much, and gave so little in return. It's easy to idolize the image of the Spartan warrior, but harder to confront the societal trade-offs that made such an image possible. The allure of the Spartan ethos may be strong, but it's crucial to remember that behind every legend lies a more complicated truth. In contemporary culture, where the idea of strength is still often equated with might, Sparta's story serves as a cautionary tale. It challenges us to consider the true cost of power and to reflect on the ways in which we, as modern societies, might be making similar trade-offs. Are we, like the Spartans, too focused on one aspect of our identity to the detriment of others? Are we sacrificing long-term resilience for short-term gains? The enduring legacy of Sparta is not just one of military might, but of the delicate dance between strength and vulnerability, between the allure of legend and the reality of history. It's a tale that invites us to look beyond the bronze sheen and to see the complexities that lie beneath. As we wrap up our exploration of Spartan history, let's carry forward the lessons of balance, humility, and the recognition that true greatness is as much about the heart as it is about the sword. In the end, the story of Sparta is a mirror reflecting not just the past, but our own journeys in the quest for meaning and strength. So, here's to the Spartans, masters of war, architects of their own myth, and unwitting teachers of the timeless lesson that in the pursuit of greatness, balance is the key. If the ancient Egyptians had a love story, it would surely be with the Nile River. This wasn't just some casual fling, it was a full-blown, committed relationship. We're talking about a river that dictated everything from their morning routines to their yearly calendars. And when it came to farming, especially wheat, the Nile was the bay and say of their agricultural destiny. Forget explaining your sparty Wi-Fi to your boss. The ancient Egyptians had something way more reliable, the annual floods of the Nile. Now, let's break down this affair. The Egyptian calendar was a bit of an enigma, a three-season wonder that made harvesting wheat as predictable as your favorite TV rerun. They had Akhit for the inundation, Peret for the growing season, and Shemu for the harvest. That's right, folks, the whole shebang revolved around the river's moods. Akhit, roughly from June to September, was when the Nile decided to stretch its legs and inundate the land. It was like the river's annual spa day, rejuvenating the soil with nutrient-rich silt, setting the stage for some serious wheat action. The Nile's flooding wasn't just reliable, it was practically clockwork. The river swelled with such regularity that it made modern Swiss watches look like cheap knockoffs. This was crucial because, in the world of ancient Egypt, missing the flood was like missing your alarm on a Monday morning. Catastrophic. But thanks to this natural irrigation system, they could grow wheat in abundance. And if you're wondering how these ancient farmers managed without weather apps, they employed a little gadget called a nilometer. Picture a giant yardstick for measuring water levels, and you've got the gist. As the waters receded, the land was ripe for agriculture, and the farmers got busy with their tools. Now, these weren't your shiny, ergonomically designed garden tools from the local home improvement store. No, ancient Egyptian farmers wielded tools that had more in common with a caveman's toolkit than anything else. Think wooden plows pulled by oxen and sickles made from flint or copper. These folks weren't about to win any innovation awards, but hey, they got the job done. The workforce dynamics in ancient Egypt were a sight to behold. You might think of them as a bunch of sunburnt peasants toiling under the watchful eye of a whip-cracking taskmaster. But hold your chariots. This was more of a community affair, with everyone pitching in. Sure, there were overseers, but the farmers worked in teams, and it was surprisingly democratic for its time. They even had organized lunch breaks where everyone got a piece of bread and a jug of beer. Yes, beer, because why not make back-breaking labor slightly less back-breaking with a little liquid courage? The wheat economy of ancient Egypt was nothing short of impressive. At its peak, the Egyptians could produce enough wheat to feed their population and have plenty left over for trade. This wasn't just about filling their bellies, it was an economic powerhouse. Wheat was the currency of the realm, the gold standard of foodstuffs. Forget Bitcoin. In ancient Egypt, wheat was king. But let's not get too starry-eyed. While the romantic narrative of farmers working in harmony with the mighty Nile is appealing, the reality was a bit more gritty. It was hard work, with long hours under the relentless sun. And while the Nile was generally reliable, it wasn't foolproof. A low flood could spell disaster, leading to famine and hardship. So, while they might have had their nilometers, the ancient Egyptians also had their fair share of sleepless nights, wondering if the river would rise to the occasion. As we navigate through this grainy tale, it's clear that the Egyptians' relationship with the Nile was both a blessing and a curse. It was the cornerstone of their civilization, yet it held them in its watery grip, dictating every aspect of their lives. So, as you sit there, possibly in the comfort of your air-conditioned room, spare a thought for those ancient Egyptian farmers. They didn't have the luxury of Netflix and chill. For them, it was Nile and toil. If you thought the ancient Egyptian farmers were just sunburned souls with a penchant for river watching, think again. The real sweat and tears began once the Nile's water levels receded, leaving behind a fresh canvas for agriculture. The wheat harvest was a full-on production, and these folks didn't have the luxury of sitting back and letting nature do all the work. Nope, the toil was about to get real. First up, the wheat had to be cut. Enter the sickle. Not just any sickle, mind you, but ones that would make even the most budget-conscious DIY enthusiast wince. Imagine a crescent-shaped blade made out of flint, or if they were feeling fancy, copper. These sickles were the ancient equivalent of a Swiss Army knife, minus the corkscrew. But don't let the simplicity fool you. They were crucial to the operation. Each harvest season, farmers banded together in a scene straight out of a manual labor musical, swinging their sickles to the rhythm of hard work. Now, wielding a sickle was no walk in the park. It required precision, stamina, and an innate ability to avoid slicing off a finger or two. The wheat had to be cut low to ensure the entire stalk was gathered, maximizing yield. Picture it. Under the relentless sun, farmers moved in synchronized sweeps, crouching low, muscles straining, backs aching. Talk about a full-body workout that would make any modern gym-goer reconsider their membership. It was a grueling test of endurance, and each swing of the sickle was a reminder of their dependence on this life-giving grain. Once the wheat was cut, it was time to bundle it up, because nothing says teamwork like tying bunches of wheat together while trying not to get poked in the eye. These bundles were then transported to the threshing floor, a designated area where the magic of separating grain from chaff happened. But don't let the word magic fool you. This was manual labor at its finest. Threshing involved spreading the wheat out on the ground and using livestock, usually oxen or donkeys, to trample over it. This wasn't some pastoral scene of animal harmony. It was more like an ancient version of a demolition derby with hooves. The animals stomped and crushed the wheat, breaking the husks and releasing the precious grain inside. It was loud, chaotic, and a little bit smelly, but it got the job done. If you're picturing idyllic peasants enjoying the rustic charm of farm life, let's set the record straight. This was no countryside retreat. The reality was more akin to an assembly line before Henry Ford made it cool. Each step of the process was a cog in the machine, and there was little time for leisure. The pressure was on to complete the harvest before the scorching heat rendered the remaining crops useless. And then there was winnowing, the final hurrah in the wheat processing saga. After threshing, the grain and chaff were tossed into the air, letting the wind separate the two. The lighter chaff blew away, leaving the heavier grain to fall back to the ground. While it sounds straightforward, it required a keen eye and a steady hand to ensure the best yield. Imagine being a human fan, counting on the Nile's breezes to do their part. It was like baking a souffle in a storm. Timing was everything, and there was no room for error. The hard truth was that this laborious cycle defined their existence. The myth of the merry peasant life, with leisurely afternoons by the river, was just that, a myth. In reality, it was back-breaking work, and each successful harvest was a testament to their resilience and grit. The Egyptians lived in constant negotiation with their environment, balancing reverence for the mighty Nile with the harsh demands of agricultural life. As the grain was finally gathered, it became the currency of their livelihood. It was stored in granaries that towered like ancient skyscrapers, safeguarding their future against famine and ensuring a steady supply for trade and taxation. But even with these monumental efforts, Mother Nature could still throw a curveball. A low flood or an unexpected drought could turn the tables, leaving the community vulnerable and reminding them of their fragile existence. So, while the romantic notion of a peaceful agrarian life is certainly appealing, the truth is far more complex. The ancient Egyptian farmers lived at the mercy of their environment, toiling from dawn till dusk, driven by necessity and survival. Their story is one of perseverance, a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of sustenance in a world where the balance of life hung by the thinnest thread of wheat. It's a reminder that history isn't just a parade of grand events and illustrious leaders. It's also the story of ordinary people, their daily struggles, and their indomitable spirit. The ancient Egyptians may not have had the luxury of modern conveniences, but they sure knew how to make the most of what they had, even if it meant a sore back and a relentless sunburn. And while we've only just scraped the surface of their wheat-filled world, there's plenty more to uncover as we continue this historical journey. Now, as the ancient Egyptian farmers laid down their tools and wiped the sweat from their brows, the real work had just begun. Because in ancient Egypt, wheat wasn't just food. It was a currency, a status symbol, and occasionally a bargaining chip more valuable than gold itself. Welcome to the economic roller coaster of ancient Egypt, where wheat was the undisputed king of commodities. Let's talk costs. First, there was the investment in tools. Those sickles and plows didn't grow on trees, though ironically, they were often made from them. A sickle could set you back a chunk of copper or flint, which was a significant outlay for your average farmer. And if you wanted to get fancy with a wooden plow, you might need to barter with a neighbor for some extra materials. It was an ancient DIY project, minus the YouTube tutorials, and the stakes were high. A busted tool could mean the difference between a successful harvest and a season of hardship. Then came the labor costs. While you might imagine these farmers working for the sheer joy of it, reality was a tad more mundane. They were often paid in kind, usually with a combination of wheat, beer, and other staples. And while that sounds like the world's oldest employee benefits package, it was also a matter of survival. In a world without currency as we know it, keeping your workers fed and happy was critical. Now, if you think the marketing department sat this one out, think again. Once the wheat was harvested and stored in towering granaries, it was time to play the ancient equivalent of the stock market. The Egyptians were shrewd traders, and their wheat was their ticket to the big leagues. It was exported to neighboring regions in exchange for goods they couldn't produce themselves, like cedar wood from Lebanon or luxury items from distant lands. The trade routes were the arteries of ancient Egypt, and wheat was the lifeblood coursing through them. But here's where things get fascinating. In certain circles, wheat was downright priceless. Forget gold and silver. If you could control the grain, you controlled the region. During times of famine or poor harvests, wheat's value skyrocketed. It was the ultimate hedge against disaster, a tangible asset that could be traded, stored, or used to pay taxes. Which brings us to the real power players in this wheat-fueled economy, the scribes. These guys were the bureaucratic wizards of their time, keeping meticulous records of every bushel of wheat harvested, stored, and traded. Imagine a world without spreadsheets or calculators, yet these scribes managed an empire's entire agricultural output with nothing more than a reed stylus and papyrus scrolls. Their record-keeping was so precise, they'd make modern accountants break into a sweat. Every transaction was documented, every tax accounted for, and every grain meticulously tracked. And speaking of taxes, the ancient Egyptians didn't mess around. Wheat wasn't just for bread. It was a taxman's dream come true. Farmers paid taxes in grain, which was then used to feed the army, support temple activities, and maintain public works. It was a system that ensured the pharaoh's coffers were always full, and the empire ran like a well-oiled machine, or at least as well-oiled as an ancient agrarian society could manage. But let's not romanticize this bureaucratic prowess too much. While the scribes were undoubtedly brilliant, the system they maintained was as much about control as it was about efficiency. The state kept a keen eye on production, ensuring that every field was accounted for and every bushel tallied. It was a delicate balance of power, with farmers working under the watchful gaze of the state apparatus. Their livelihoods were tied to the whims of the Nile and the demands of the pharaoh, and any deviation from the norm could spell disaster. So, while the image of ancient Egypt is often one of pyramids and pharaohs, the real backbone of the society was its wheat economy. It was a complex web of agriculture, trade, and taxation that underpinned the entire civilization. And while the romanticized notion of a peaceful, agrarian existence is appealing, the truth was far more nuanced. It was a world of hard work, shrewd economics, and relentless record-keeping. As we delve deeper into this ancient economy, it's clear that wheat was much more than a crop. It was a symbol of power, a tool for negotiation, and a testament to the ingenuity of a civilization that thrived in one of the harshest environments on Earth. And while our journey through the sands of time is far from over, it's worth pausing to appreciate the intricate dance of economics and agriculture that defined ancient Egypt. In the end, the story of wheat in ancient Egypt is one of resilience and adaptation. It's a tale of how a civilization harnessed the power of a river to create an empire that would stand the test of time. And while the myths and legends of this remarkable society often focus on the grand monuments and mighty pharaohs, the true heroes were the farmers, scribes, and traders who turned wheat into wealth. So, as we continue our exploration, let's keep in mind that history isn't just about the big names and grand events. It's also about the everyday people who lived, worked, and thrived in a world that was as challenging as it was awe-inspiring. And while the ancient Egyptians may have lacked the conveniences of modern life, they certainly knew how to make the most of what they had, even if it meant turning grain into gold. And speaking of turning grain into gold, let's shimmy our way into the political arena of ancient Egypt, where wheat was the ultimate power player. You see, pharaohs may have worn the crowns, but it was wheat that truly ruled the kingdom. Think of it as the ancient Egyptian version of oil, a resource so valuable it could make or break dynasties. In this agricultural empire, the politics of wheat were woven into every aspect of society, from tax policies to international relations. First off, let's talk about pharaohs' tax policies, because even back then, the only certainties in life were death and taxes. The pharaohs weren't just hoarding grain for bread-making marathons. They were shrewdly turning wheat into a fiscal tool. Farmers paid their taxes in grain, which was then funneled into the royal granaries. These granaries weren't just storage facilities. They were the economic heart of Egypt. Picture them as the Fort Knox of the ancient world, but instead of gold bars, they housed bushels of wheat. And while the IRS might not have been around, the pharaoh's tax collectors were just as relentless. But here's a juicy tidbit. The tax rate wasn't fixed. It ebbed and flowed like the Nile itself, depending on the annual flood levels. A bountiful flood meant higher yields, and you guessed it, higher taxes. Conversely, when the Nile was in a sulky mood and didn't flood as much, taxes lightened up. It was a dance of give and take, a balancing act to ensure that neither the farmers nor the royal coffers went hungry. Now, let's zoom out and look at the international stage. Egypt wasn't just hoarding its wheat for local consumption. Oh no, they were exporting it far and wide, turning grain into a diplomatic tool. And we're not talking about sending a few care packages to the neighbors. No, they were exporting boatloads of the stuff across the Mediterranean. The Egyptians traded wheat with the likes of the Greeks and the Syrians, swapping grain for luxury goods and raw materials they couldn't produce themselves. Cedar from Lebanon, silver from Anatolia, and maybe a fancy trinket or two from far-flung lands all found their way into Egypt thanks to this golden grain. But here's where things get interesting. Wheat wasn't just a commodity, it was a political weapon. During times of scarcity, when other regions faced famine, Egypt held the upper hand. They could dictate terms, secure favorable trade agreements, and even extend their influence by offering wheat as aid. It was the ancient version of playing Monopoly with the get-out-of-jail-free card hidden up your sleeve. Let's not forget the scribes, those bureaucratic maestros who kept the wheels of this wheat-fueled machine turning. These guys were the linchpins of the Egyptian economy, ensuring that every grain was accounted for and every transaction meticulously recorded. And let's be real, were the unsung heroes of ancient Egypt. Without their records, the whole system would have crumbled faster than a pyramid built on sand. They were the guardians of grain, the overseers of order, wielding their reed pens like wands to conjure balance sheets out of thin air. Now, remember that bureaucracy we mentioned. It wasn't just a modern invention designed to drive you to madness with paperwork. Ancient Egypt had a red tape system that would make any modern government blush. The scribes were the cogs in this bureaucratic beast, maintaining a delicate balance between state control and agricultural production. They ensured that the pharaoh's granaries were well stocked, the taxes were collected, and the trade routes flowed smoothly. But it wasn't all sunshine and papyrus scrolls. The system was as much about control as it was about efficiency. The state had a vested interest in keeping a tight grip on the wheat supply, and any deviation from the norm was met with swift correction. Farmers lived under the watchful eyes of the pharaoh's officials, knowing that their livelihoods were tied to forces beyond their control, the whims of the Nile and the demands of the state. And let's not romanticize the role of the pharaohs too much. While they might have been the face of Egyptian power, they were also savvy politicians who understood the importance of wheat in maintaining their grip on the throne. Pharaohs were known to enact grain policies that ensured their reign's stability. They used wheat to win favor with the gods, offering it in temples as tribute. They used it to win favor with their subjects, hosting feasts and distributing bread during times of need. They even used it to win favor with foreign powers, offering grain as gifts or bribes to secure alliances. But here's the kicker. While the pharaohs wielded wheat as a tool of power, they were also at its mercy. Poor harvest could spell disaster, leading to unrest, famine, and potential overthrow. It's a stark reminder that even the mightiest rulers are subject to the whims of nature and the delicate balance of their economies. As we delve deeper into the political drama of ancient Egypt, it becomes clear that wheat was more than just a crop. It was a currency, a symbol of power, and a tool of diplomacy. It was the backbone of an empire that thrived in the harshest of environments, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. And while the myths and legends of Egypt often focus on the grandeur of pyramids and the might of pharaohs, the true story is far more intricate. It's a tale of how a civilization harnessed the power of agriculture to build an empire, balancing the demands of nature with the aspirations of power. So, as we continue this journey through the sands of time, let's remember that history isn't just about grand narratives and legendary figures. It's also about the everyday people who lived and worked in a world where wheat was king. It's a story of resilience, adaptation, and the relentless pursuit of survival in a land where the balance of life was as fragile as a stalk of wheat swaying in the Nile's breeze. And with that, we leave our wheat-filled saga teetering on the brink of more discoveries. There's a lot more to untangle in this web of ancient politics and economics, so stay tuned as we continue to explore the harvest of history in our next installment. As we tiptoe into the grand finale of our Egyptian wheat saga, let's take a moment to pull back the curtain on some of the myths that have clung to ancient Egypt like hieroglyphs on a temple wall. Was Egypt truly the breadbasket of the ancient world? Or is that just a case of really effective ancient marketing? After all, the Egyptians were quite the PR maestros. They could turn a simple river into a deity and a loaf of bread into an economic powerhouse. First things first, the idea of Egypt as the sole breadbasket of antiquity is a bit of a stretch. Sure, they were prolific producers of wheat, but they weren't the only game in town. The Fertile Crescent, that ancient arc stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, was also churning out crops like there was no tomorrow. Mesopotamia, with its Tigris and Euphrates rivers, was a serious contender in the grain game. And let's not forget the Indus Valley civilization. Those folks knew a thing or two about agriculture. So, while Egypt had its fair share of wheat fields, calling it the breadbasket of the whole ancient world is like saying New York City is the only place with pizza. Delicious, yes, but not the sole provider. Now, don't get us wrong. Egypt was a major player. During the New Kingdom, around 1550 to 1070 BCE, the country not only fed its own population, but also exported surplus grain to neighboring regions. And they did it with style, capitalizing on their unique geographic advantages and those trusty Nile floods. But claiming they were the sole providers is like saying the Nile was just a lazy stream. It doesn't quite capture the complexity of the situation. One reason for Egypt's reputation might be those scribes we mentioned earlier. These ancient accountants weren't just tallying grain, they were crafting narratives. The Egyptians were meticulous record keepers, and their written records have survived the sands of time better than most. This means we have a more complete picture of their agricultural prowess than we do for other ancient civilizations. It's like comparing your friend's Instagram feed, curated and perfect, to your own behind-the-scenes chaos. But let's face it, the romantic notion of Egypt as a land of endless wheat fields has its appeal. It's a story of abundance and prosperity, of a civilization that thrived against the odds. The reality, however, is that life wasn't all pyramids and posies. The Egyptians faced their fair share of challenges, from fickle river levels to occasional famines. Their ability to adapt and innovate in the face of these challenges is what truly set them apart. They weren't just resting on their laurels or their loaves. Speaking of innovation, let's turn our gaze to the enduring legacy of Egyptian agriculture. The impact of their practices ripples through time, like a stone skipping across the Nile. Take, for instance, their irrigation techniques. The ancient Egyptians were masters of water management, using canals, basins, and dikes to control the floodwaters and irrigate their fields. This wasn't just a nifty trick, it was a blueprint for future civilizations. Fast forward to today, and you'll find echoes of their methods in modern agricultural practices across the globe. Next time you see a sprinkler system at work, tip your hat to the Egyptians. They were the original water whisperers. Then there's the matter of crop storage. The Egyptians were savvy about preserving their harvest, storing grain in granaries to safeguard against famine. This foresight was an early lesson in food security, a concept that's more relevant than ever in today's world of climate change and resource scarcity. It's a reminder that while we might have fancier technology now, the fundamental challenges of agriculture remain the same. And let's not forget about those scribes and their meticulous record-keeping. In a world where data is king, the Egyptians were ahead of their time, understanding the power of information long before the digital age. So, as you butter your morning toast, perhaps you should offer a silent nod to the farmers of the Nile. Those ancient agricultural wizards laid the groundwork for many of the practices we take for granted today. Their legacy is baked into the bread of our modern world, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. But before we wrap up our journey through the wheat fields of ancient Egypt, let's return to the myths for a moment. The stories that have survived the millennia often paint a picture of paradise, a land of plenty where the sun always shone and the Nile always rose just right. It's a comforting thought, isn't it? But the truth is far more nuanced. The Egyptians were a people who danced on the edge of survival, their lives dictated by the whims of a river and the demands of a society that prized grain as much as gold. It's easy to romanticize the past, to turn history into a series of golden tales and larger-than-life characters. But the real story is one of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges, of farmers who toiled under a blazing sun, scribes who kept the wheels turning, and rulers who understood the power of a loaf of bread. It's a story of resilience, of adaptation, and of a civilization that managed to thrive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. And so, as we bid farewell to the wheat fields of ancient Egypt, let's carry forward the lessons of their legacy. Let's remember that history isn't just about grand monuments and mighty pharaohs. It's about the everyday struggles and triumphs of people who lived millennia ago, yet whose impact still lingers in our world today. And as you savor that slice of toast tomorrow morning, take a moment to appreciate the journey of wheat from the banks of the Nile to your breakfast table. It's a journey that spans centuries, a tale of survival and success, and a reminder that the stories of the past continue to shape our present. In the end, the Egyptians might not have been the sole breadbasket of the ancient world, but they were undoubtedly masters of turning adversity into opportunity. Their story is a testament to the power of agriculture, the resilience of humanity, and the enduring legacy of a civilization that knew how to make the most of what they had. So here's to the farmers, the scribes, and yes, even the pharaohs. They might not have had the comforts of modern life, but they sure knew how to leave a mark on history, one grain at a time. If you ever found yourself wondering what ancient folks did for fun before Netflix, I've got the scoop. They peered at the stars with a dedication that could put most modern hobbies to shame. Take the Mayans, for instance. Around 500 BCE, they weren't just casually glancing up at the night sky like, oh look, stars. Nope. They were the original cosmic detectives, mapping out the heavens with more precision than a GPS app on a good day. And while it's tempting to imagine them having moonlit picnics under a blanket of stars, their sky-gazing had way more to do with survival than romance. For the Mayans, the night sky was like a celestial calendar, a mystical guide to the rhythms of life. They weren't just stargazers, they were star strategists. Imagine trying to plant crops without a nifty smartphone weather app or, a calendar. You'd need something reliable to figure out when to start planting those seeds. Enter the stars. By observing celestial movements, Mayans could predict seasonal changes with a skill that would make any modern farmer green with envy. But it wasn't just any star that caught their eye. Venus was their celestial rock star, the bay and say of the night sky. Why Venus? Well, this planet has a little trick up its sleeve. It follows a predictable cycle that's both regular and visible to the naked eye. It appears as a morning star, disappears, then reappears as an evening star, all in a cycle of about 584 days. For the Mayans, who enjoyed a good cosmic pattern, Venus was the ultimate puzzle to solve. They even had an entire book dedicated to its movements, known as the Dresden Codex. Think of it as their version of an astrological almanac, but with a lot more cultural significance and zero horoscopes about your love life. And here's where things get even more fascinating. The Mayans weren't just obsessed with Venus for the sake of stargazing. This wasn't some ancient club of amateur astronomers meeting on Tuesdays. Their observations fed directly into their calendar systems, which were mind-blowingly sophisticated. The Mayan calendar didn't just track days. It intertwined with their agricultural practices, religious ceremonies, and even political events. Imagine scheduling your entire year around the stars. Talk about cosmic planning. Let's bust a myth while we're at it. The Mayan calendar ending in 2012 didn't signal the apocalypse. Sorry, doomsday fans. It was just the end of a cycle, like a cosmic reset button, not an ancient, the end screen. Their long count calendar was meant to track vast amounts of time, spanning over 5,000 years, and was just one part of their multi-layered calendrical system. They had the Harb, a 365-day solar calendar, and the Tzolk'in, a 260-day ceremonial calendar. When you combine these, you get the calendar round, which repeats every 52 years. It's like the cosmic equivalent of a leap year, but way more complicated. The practical side of Mayan astronomy wasn't just about when to plant corn, although that was definitely on the agenda. It had everything to do with maintaining social order and power structures. Priests and rulers would use these celestial alignments to legitimize their authority. The stars say I'm in charge probably had a nice ring to it back then. And let's not forget, having the ability to predict celestial events would have seemed nothing short of magical to the average Mayan citizen. Talk about a power move. The Mayans lived in a world where the sky wasn't just a backdrop, but a live-action map of divine motions and earthly decisions. Their attention to celestial detail was as precise as a Swiss watch, albeit a lot larger and made entirely out of stone and spirituality. They built observatories like the one at Chichen Itza, El Caracal, specifically designed for tracking the movements of Venus and other celestial bodies. This wasn't some backyard telescope setup. It was a stone structure aligned perfectly with the heavens. And how about the dark side of this astrological obsession? Well, it wasn't all peaceful star charts and cosmic musings. The Mayans also engaged in ritualistic ceremonies and offerings to appease the gods they believed were controlling these celestial movements. In some cases, this meant human sacrifice, a grim reminder that their cosmic understanding was deeply intertwined with spiritual beliefs and societal norms that were, let's say, a bit more intense than today's casual stargazing sessions. In essence, Mayan astronomy was an impressive blend of science, spirituality, and societal control. They turned the sky into a cosmic clock, a divine message board, and a political tool all rolled into one. It's a testament to human ingenuity and the lengths we'll go to understand our place in the universe. So, next time you glance up at the stars, spare a thought for the Mayans whose gaze was fixed on the same celestial wonders, interpreting them in ways that shaped their entire civilization. So, now that we've got a firm grip on the Mayans' celestial obsession, let's dive deep into the real engine behind their stargazing success, mathematics. Or as I like to think of it, the original math magic that had the Mayans calculating celestial events with a precision that would make a modern-day astronomer do a double take. And what's at the heart of this mathematical wizardry? Brace yourself for a base 20 system, which is one of those, why didn't we think of that, moments in history. The Mayans weren't just counting on their fingers and toes, though with a base 20 system, it wouldn't hurt to have a few extra digits. This Vigesimal system, as it's called, was the backbone of their calendar and astronomical calculations. While the rest of the world was still fumbling around with more cumbersome methods, the Mayans elegantly simplified things with darts and bars. Darts for ones, bars for fives. It's like playing ancient Tetris, with each piece fitting perfectly into their intricate puzzle. Now, here's where the Mayans really blew the roof off the observatory. They calculated the solar year to be 365, 2,420 days long. And just to put that into perspective, the Gregorian calendar we use today is only a smidge better at 365, 2,425 days. We're talking about a difference of just 0.0005 days, a rounding error in the grand cosmic scale. These folks were doing math that would still be respectable in a modern-day physics department without so much as a pencil and paper, let alone a calculator. They were the human calculators of ancient times, using their brains to figure out what we need machines for today. But while they were nailing the math, real-world problems didn't just vanish into thin or cloudy air. Think about it. You've got your calculations down pat. You're ready to impress the masses with predictions of eclipses and planetary movements. And then, bam, cloudy skies. The Mayans, like today's beachgoers, had to deal with the unpredictability of weather. No amount of mathematical genius could predict when the clouds would roll in and ruin a perfectly good stargazing session. It's the kind of cosmic irony that ancient Mayan astronomers probably didn't find very funny. Speaking of cosmic irony, let's talk about the Dresden Codex. This isn't some lost episode of your favorite crime show, but rather one of the oldest surviving books from the Americas, dating back to the 12th century. Think of it as the Mayan astronomer's handbook, a veritable cheat sheet for celestial events. It's packed with tables for lunar and solar eclipses, the movement of Venus, and even predictions on seasonal changes. And while you won't find any coffee stains or dog-eared pages, you will find an astonishing level of detail and artistry that speaks to the Mayans' dual love of science and art. Now, the Dresden Codex is named after the German city where it currently resides, but its contents are pure Mayan genius. Imagine an ancient scribe painstakingly copying down numbers and glyphs, perhaps with the same dedication we put into binge-watching an entire season of a TV show in one sitting. The Codex was essentially an astronomical roadmap, guiding priests and rulers in their celestial calculations. It's a testament to the Mayans' mathematical prowess and their ability to turn numbers into a tool of cosmic storytelling. But let's not romanticize the whole thing without acknowledging the gritty reality. The Mayans didn't have the luxury of trial and error that modern scientists enjoy. A miscalculation wasn't just an oops, my bad moment. It could mean the difference between bountiful crops or famine, social order or chaos. Priests and rulers relied heavily on accurate predictions to maintain their power and influence. After all, a leader who could predict an eclipse was surely divinely favored, right? That's a tough act to follow if your predictions were off by even a fraction. And here's a neat little tidbit. While the Mayans were doing all this mind-bending math, they had no concept of zero as we understand it. Zero didn't appear in their vigesimal system until around the 4th century. It's like trying to bake a cake without flour. Possible, but not ideal. Yet, despite this mathematical quirk, they managed to achieve feats that would make Pythagoras proud. In essence, the Mayan approach to mathematics wasn't just about numbers. It was about power, prestige, and survival. They used their mathematical acumen to unravel the mysteries of the universe, turning abstract calculations into concrete political capital. And while their celestial calculations were undoubtedly impressive, it's the human element, the desire to understand, predict, and control that truly defined their astronomical achievements. As we marvel at their mathematical and astronomical accomplishments, it's crucial to remember that the Mayans lived in a world where knowledge was power, and the stars were the ultimate source of wisdom. They crafted a civilization that gazed skyward, not just in wonder, but with a keen eye for patterns and a fearless pursuit of cosmic truth. And while they couldn't control the weather, they certainly made the most of every clear night, jotting down their observations in codices that have outlasted empires and time itself. In the grand tapestry of history, the Mayans remind us that even in the face of uncertainty, be it a cloudy sky or a political storm, there's always a way to navigate the stars. And speaking of navigating the stars, let's talk about the Mayan architectural marvels that were basically the Hubble Space Telescopes of their time. Forget your run-of-the-mill temples and palaces. These structures were the Mayan equivalent of NASA mission control centers. We're diving into places like the Caracal in Chichen Itza and those enigmatic E-group complexes, where the Mayans mastered the art of combining function with a dash of panache. The Caracal, whose name, by the way, translates to snail in Spanish, due to its spiral staircase, wasn't just some stone heap in the jungle. This observatory was a powerhouse of astronomical observation. Rising above the treetops, it was strategically positioned to track celestial events, especially the movements of Venus. If you're picturing a Stone Age version of a guy with a telescope, think again. The Caracal's windows and doorways were aligned with the cardinal directions and specific celestial events, making it a giant stone calculator with a side of architecture. This wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about precision. The Mayans didn't just build, they engineered. Enter the E-group complexes, which were a sort of architectural symphony with a celestial purpose. Found throughout the Mayan lowlands, these complexes typically consisted of a large, square platform with a pyramid on one side and a series of smaller structures on the opposite side. This setup wasn't just for show. It was designed to mark the sun's position on the horizon at the solstices and equinoxes. Picture it, the sun peeking over the horizon, casting its first light during a solstice right through the gap between two structures. If that doesn't scream cosmic flair, I don't know what does. Now, let's talk style. There's a persistent myth that the Mayans were all about practicality and had zero flair, like they were the ancient equivalent of wearing socks with sandals. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Their structures were as much about demonstrating power and sophistication as they were about practical use. Take the Pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, for instance. It's not just an imposing structure. Twice a year, during the equinoxes, shadows create the illusion of a serpent slithering down the steps. It's the kind of celestial show that would put any modern light show to shame. But why all this astronomical hocus-pocus? Well, here's where the political intrigue kicks in. Controlling celestial knowledge was like having the ultimate ace up your sleeve. Mayan rulers, often seen as semi-divine figures, used their understanding of the cosmos to legitimize their rule. Think about it. If you claimed that the gods whispered cosmic secrets in your ear, and then you accurately predicted an eclipse, you'd have the populace eating out of your hand faster than a royal banquet. It was a divine endorsement, a celestial thumbs-up that reinforced their political power. And while we're busting myths, let's tackle the notion that these architectural wonders were just vanity projects. Sure, they were impressive, but they were also strategic. In a world where power was as fragile as a clay pot, the ability to predict celestial events and align these with religious ceremonies provided a narrative that rulers could manipulate to maintain control. The common people might not understand the math behind the astronomy, but they could see the sun, moon, and stars align with the temples, reinforcing the ruler's divine connection. Economically, these structures were no small feat. Imagine the resources needed to construct such buildings: manpower, materials, and time, all dedicated to creating these stone marvels. The investment was enormous, but the payoff was worth it. Besides the obvious religious and political benefits, these observatories helped predict agricultural cycles, which in turn stabilized the economy. When planting and harvesting times were aligned with celestial predictions, it meant fewer crop failures and more food on the table. It's like having a financial advisor who also dabbles in astrology. The Mayans were not just builders. They were masterful planners, embedding their cosmic understanding into the very fabric of their cities. Their observatories were not isolated structures, but integral parts of the urban landscape, tying together the heavens and the earth in an architectural and spiritual symphony. It's a testament to their ingenuity that these stone structures have withstood the test of time, long after the Mayan civilization itself faded away. So, next time you find yourself marveling at a modern skyscraper or a high-tech observatory, spare a thought for the Mayans. They were the original skyward architects, weaving together stone and star with a precision that still leaves us in awe. Their legacy is a reminder that style and function aren't mutually exclusive, but can coexist in a way that elevates both to new heights. And as we wrap up this architectural tour, let's not forget that the story doesn't end here. There's more to uncover about the Mayans, their astronomical prowess, and the social dynamics that played out beneath those same stars. So, stay tuned as we continue to unravel the cosmic tapestry they wove, one stone at a time. Speaking of uncovering cosmic tales, let's zoom into the nitty-gritty of Mayan daily life, where astronomy was the puppet master pulling the strings. Yeah, if you thought the stars were just background decor for the Mayans, think again. Their celestial calendar was like a cosmic Swiss army knife, dictating everything from when to plant maize to when it was socially acceptable to start a war. If you're picturing a society where everyone's head is perpetually tilted skyward, you're not far off. First, let's talk agriculture, the bread and butter, or should I say maize and cacao, of Mayan life. The Mayans weren't just randomly scattering seeds and hoping for the best. Nope, they were more like cosmic farmers, planting and harvesting according to intricate celestial cycles. The Harb calendar, their 365-day solar guide, was crucial here. It's not just an ancient to-do list. It was their version of a farmer's almanac. Missing the right planting window could mean the difference between a bumper crop and watching your neighbor smugly harvest while you've got zilch. Now, let's sprinkle in a bit of celestial danger. Imagine you're a Mayan ruler, and you've promised your people an eclipse because, hey, you've got the most sophisticated astronomical knowledge around. But then, oops, you got the timing wrong. That's more than just an awkward, my bad moment. It's a full-blown PR disaster. Your divinity is suddenly under question, and let's just say, nobody wants to be the ancient equivalent of the weatherman who promised sunshine during a downpour. The stakes were sky-high, literally. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. When predictions were Spartan, it was like having your own cosmic endorsement. Rulers could pull off some serious celestial showmanship, strengthening their grip on power. Look, I made the sky do tricks. Translates pretty well into maintaining control over the masses. It was the ultimate power flex, a celestial bigwig move that made everyone else look like amateurs. Speaking of power, let's delve into the priesthood, those lucky folks with a front-row seat to the cosmos. Being a priest in Mayan society was like holding a PhD in celestial sciences, plus a dash of divine PR skills. Priests weren't just spiritual guides, they were the Stephen Hawkings of their time, calculating celestial events with a mix of mathematics and mysticism. They were the keepers of knowledge, the ones who could read the stars like you and I read our morning news feeds. This wasn't just any old gig. Becoming a priest astronomer was the Mayan equivalent of landing a tech job in Silicon Valley. You got to wear the ceremonial bling, sit at the cool kids' table, and have everyone hang on your every word. You wielded the kind of power that could sway decisions on everything from crop planting to the timing of wars. And let's face it, when your job involves predicting eclipses and deciphering the heavens, you're not just a cog in the cosmic machine. You pretty much are the cosmic machine. Now, imagine the social hierarchy. You've got your rulers, who play the I'm basically a demigod card, and then you have the priests who back them up with celestial evidence. It's a neat little setup. The rulers claim divine right, and the priests supply the cosmic receipts. Everyone else, they're just hoping the stars align in their favor. It's a world where knowledge is power, and the stars are your ultimate allies, or your fiercest rivals if you get it wrong. Now, let's bust a myth while we're at it. The Mayans didn't view the stars as distant deities to be worshipped from afar. Oh no, they saw them as active participants in the grand play of life. The stars told tales of gods and heroes, and understanding these movements was like cracking the code of the universe. It's a romantic notion, sure, but with a hefty dose of practicality. They weren't just starry-eyed dreamers. They were cosmic strategists, using the heavens to their advantage on Earth. But let's not overlook the darker side of this cosmic relationship. When the stars dictated war, it wasn't just about picking the right battle time for the sake of superstition. Warfare was a strategic necessity, often dictated by celestial cues. The stars could signal auspicious times for launching campaigns or defending territories. It was a deadly game of chess, with the sky as the board and human lives as the pieces. The Mayan military strategies were as calculated as their celestial observations, a harsh reminder that the cosmos could be both a guiding light and a harbinger of doom. In the grand scheme of things, the Mayans lived in a world where the sky was a living, breathing entity that influenced every aspect of life. Their calendars weren't just tools, they were the lifeblood of society, dictating the flow of time, the cadence of life, and the balance of power. The priest astronomers, they were the orchestrators of this cosmic symphony, interpreting the celestial notes that kept the world in harmony, or discord, if the stars so willed. So, While we might gaze up at the night sky and see only stars, the Mayans saw a universe of possibilities, a cosmic canvas where the divine and the mundane intertwined in a dance as old as time itself. They remind us that while the heavens may seem distant, their influence reaches down to earth in ways that are both profound and profoundly human. And as we continue to unravel the mysteries of Mayan astronomy, we find ourselves not just looking back in time, but peering into a world where the stars were more than just points of light. They were the very essence of existence. As we lift our gaze from the Mayan world of cosmic calendars and celestial symphonies, we find ourselves in a different era, one where European explorers are setting sail with stars in their eyes and dreams of empires in their hearts. The Mayan civilization might have faded by the time the Spaniards arrived, but their astronomical achievements left a legacy that was about as hard to ignore as a solar eclipse. When the Spanish conquistadors stumbled upon the remnants of Mayan cities, they were astounded, not just by the sheer scale of the architecture, but by the profound understanding of time and space that these savages, as they dubbed them, possessed. Imagine their surprise when they discovered that the Mayans had calculated Venus's orbit with an accuracy that rivaled their own astronomers. And remember, this was an age when Europe was just getting the hang of Copernican heliocentrism, so the Mayans' celestial savvy was like finding a smartphone in a museum of sundials. The Europeans were both baffled and intrigued by these New World stargazers. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Mayan books, ended up in the hands of German scholars who pored over it like a cosmic enigma. While the conquistadors were busy with their land grabs, the scholars looked to the skies, hoping to unravel the Mayan secrets of time and the universe. And though the codex was eventually decoded, the allure of Mayan astronomy never truly faded. It continued to spark curiosity and inspire awe, much like a cosmic mystery waiting to be solved. Fast forward a few centuries, and the Mayans find themselves back in the spotlight, this time as the stars of a doomsday prophecy that took the world by storm in 2012. Ah, yes, the great apocalypse that wasn't. Somehow, the supposed end of the Mayan long count calendar got twisted into a full-blown end-of-the-world scenario, complete with dire predictions and survivalist kits flying off the shelves. It was a case of cosmic mistranslation on a grand scale. People were practically foaming at the mouth about an ancient prophecy that, in reality, was nothing more than a cosmic reset, a celestial equivalent of a new calendar on New Year's Day. But let's be honest, the idea of an ancient civilization predicting the end of the world is just too deliciously dramatic to resist. It taps into our deepest fears and fantasies, like an existential thriller with a splash of ancient mystique. And while the world didn't end in a blaze of apocalyptic glory, the 2012 prophecy did something else. It reignited global interest in the Mayans and their understanding of the cosmos. Suddenly, everyone from historians to Hollywood was revisiting the Mayan world, eager to uncover the truths buried beneath layers of time and myth. And so, the Mayans live on, not just in history books, but in the collective imagination. Their legacy, a tapestry woven from threads of science, culture, and myth. Their achievements remind us that knowledge and wonder often walk hand in hand, dancing to a celestial rhythm that transcends time and space. The Mayans didn't just observe the stars. They engaged with them, crafting a narrative that intertwined the divine and the mundane, the known and the unknown. In their world, the cosmos wasn't a distant, indifferent expanse, but a living entity that shaped life on Earth. It's a notion that resonates even today as we grapple with our place in the universe, searching for meaning in the stars. The Mayans remind us that while we might look to the heavens for answers, the true magic lies in our ability to question, to explore, and to imagine. Their legacy is a testament to the power of human curiosity and the enduring allure of the stars. As we wrap up this cosmic journey, let's take a moment to appreciate the Mayans for what they were: scientists, artists, and storytellers who dared to seek the divine in the night sky. Their accomplishments are a reminder that while civilizations may rise and fall, the stars remain a constant, guiding us, challenging us, and inspiring us to reach beyond the boundaries of what we know. In a world that often feels as chaotic as a supernova, the Mayans offer a celestial compass, pointing us toward a future where the mysteries of the universe are not just pondered, but embraced with open minds and open hearts. And there you have it, the Mayans, the original stargazers, whose cosmic legacy continues to shine brightly, illuminating the path for future generations who dare to dream beyond the stars. Whether you're an intrepid explorer, a curious scholar, or just someone who loves a good story, the Mayans invite you to look up, wonder, and discover the universe as they did, with awe, reverence, and a touch of cosmic flair. In a world where peasants rarely did more than shovel someone else's dirt, Liu Bang decided he was done with the whole life as a commoner gig. This guy, who was part-time rebel and full-time opportunist, managed to flip the script and become the Emperor of China. Yes, you heard it right. A dude who likely had more blisters than coins somehow snagged the throne and founded the Han Dynasty, kicking off what many historians like to call China's golden age. Cue the triumphant music, right. Now, let's set the stage. It's 206 BCE, and China is a hot mess of warring states and general chaos, a bit like a reality show, but with more sword fights and fewer confessionals. The Qin dynasty had just collapsed under its own oppressive weight, leaving a power vacuum bigger than the one in your living room. Enter Liu Bang, who, instead of just complaining about the state of affairs like everyone else, gathered a bunch of like-minded folks and rolled the dice on rebellion. Spoiler alert, it worked. So, how does a man whose resume probably included peasant and ex-con end up wearing the fanciest hat in the land? Well, Liu Bang was no ordinary Joe, or whatever the Chinese equivalent of Joe is. He was a charismatic leader with a knack for reading people like a cheap novel. His rise was a perfect storm of timing, charisma, and a little bit of luck. You could say Liu Bang was the original underdog story, except instead of a sports trophy, he was gunning for the imperial seal. But let's not get too swept away with the romance of it all. The harsh reality is that Liu Bang's ascent was as much about savvy politicking as it was about swordplay. For starters, he was smart enough to realize the importance of economics. The Qin had taxed the people to within an inch of their lives. Think of it as ancient austerity measures on steroids. Liu Bang, on the other hand, was like the ancient Chinese Robin Hood, reducing taxes and offering a bit of fiscal relief to the masses. This economic strategy wasn't just about winning hearts and minds. It was about stabilizing a country that was teetering on the edge of anarchy. Socially, Liu Bang pulled off a masterstroke by embracing Confucianism, which was like the social glue of ancient China. Confucianism is basically a set of ethical guidelines mixed with a dash of ancestor worship, a bit like having your family as your PR team. By adopting Confucianism as the state doctrine, Liu Bang was able to consolidate power in a way that made him look less like a tyrant and more like a benevolent ruler. Of course, this was partly about optics. Confucianism preached hierarchy and respect for authority, which was pretty convenient for a new emperor looking to keep his seat warm. Confucianism also helped Liu Bang with his PR campaign. Ever heard the phrase, "Fake it till you make it"? Liu Bang used Confucianism to project stability and moral righteousness, which was a smart move in a time when people were desperate for both. The doctrine provided a framework for governance that stressed moral integrity, filial piety, and most importantly, political loyalty. By aligning himself with these values, Liu Bang made it clear that this was a new era, one where the emperor cared about the people, or at least wanted them to think he did. So here's the kicker. While Confucianism was all about harmony and order, Liu Bang's methods of consolidating power were anything but peaceful. Remember, this was a guy who'd fought tooth and nail to get where he was. The early years of the Han Dynasty were marked by ruthless suppression of dissent and strategic marriages, because nothing says, "I love you," like a politically motivated wedding. Liu Bang knew that to keep the throne, he had to play a game of chess where the stakes were life and death. Now, let's not pretend Liu Bang was some kind of saint. He was, after all, a product of his time. A time when the average life expectancy was about 35, if you were lucky, and moral ambiguity was the name of the game. But what made Liu Bang stand out was his ability to navigate the complex web of social, economic, and political factors with the skill of a seasoned diplomat and the cunning of a fox. His legacy is a testament to the fact that even the humblest of beginnings can lead to monumental change, provided you're willing to take a few risks and play a little dirty. In the end, Liu Bang's story is a fascinating blend of myth and harsh reality. He wasn't just some plucky peasant who lucked into power. He was a shrewd operator who understood the intricate dance of politics and economics. The early Han Dynasty, under his rule, laid the groundwork for what would become one of the most influential periods in Chinese history. The fact that a former peasant could rise to such heights is a testament to the chaotic yet opportunistic nature of the times. So, the next time you find yourself complaining about the system, remember Liu Bang, a man who took on the system and came out on top, with a crown to boot. And speaking of crowns, the Han Dynasty's economic policies were just as glittering and heavy as the imperial headwear. You see, while Liu Bang was busy being the scrappy underdog who toppled a dynasty, his successors had to figure out how to keep the empire from crumbling back into chaos. Enter Emperor Wu, the dynastic daredevil who transformed the Han economy into a juggernaut that would make even today's Wall Street tycoons nod in approval. Now, if Liu Bang was the dynasty's charming rogue, Emperor Wu was its audacious architect, a ruler whose ambitions reached as high as the Great Wall was long. Under his reign from 141 to 87 BCE, the Han dynasty's territory expanded to almost 6 million square kilometers. But all this glory came with a price tag that could rival a modern-day defense budget. Emperor Wu had a penchant for military campaigns that would make a Roman legionnaire blush. And let's be honest, conquests aren't cheap. They require more than just courage and chariots. They need cold, hard cash. So how did Wu bankroll his military escapades? Well, by inventing taxes that would make a modern accountant's calculator explode. Picture this: taxes on everything from salt and iron to a monopoly on liquor production. If it moved, Wu probably taxed it. His tax policies were as intricate as a game of Go, with similar stakes. And while these taxes might have left some merchants grumbling into their rice bowls, they were instrumental in funding Wu's grand visions. The emperor also took a page from the Qin playbook by re-establishing state monopolies on essential goods. This wasn't just about squeezing every last coin out of his subjects. It was a savvy move to centralize economic control and stabilize the empire's coffers. Sure, it was a bit of a squeeze for the average Joe, or should I say, Jiang, but it meant that the state, not private merchants, called the shots in essential industries. And in a world where political power often hinged on economic might, this was a masterstroke. But while Emperor Wu was busy turning the imperial treasury into his personal piggy bank, another economic revolution was brewing. Enter the Silk Road, a trade network so epic that it makes a certain online retailer look like a mom-and-pop shop. Silk Road wasn't just a route. It was the ancient world's superhighway, spanning over 4,000 miles from China to the Mediterranean Sea. It was the Amazon. Calm of its day, only instead of 2-day shipping, you were looking at a 2-year camel trek. This network was more than just a means to move silk. It was a cultural conduit that brought exotic goods and ideas from as far away as Rome. Imagine Roman glassware and Chinese silk trading hands, or Greek philosophy and Indian mathematics hitching a ride along the route. The Silk Road was a melting pot of cultures long before the term became a cliché. So, why did the Silk Road matter? Well, it wasn't just about the goods. It was about the exchanges that shaped civilizations. The flow of ideas and inventions accelerated technological progress and cultural evolution. It was like a classroom without borders, where the curriculum was driven by curiosity and commerce. But let's not romanticize it too much. It was also a dangerous trek plagued by bandits and harsh terrains, a testament to human resilience and greed in equal measure. And let's not forget the economic impact. The Silk Road transformed cities into bustling trade hubs and made merchants rich enough to rival minor kings. It's no wonder some historians argue that the Silk Road was the economic backbone of the Han Dynasty. While Emperor Wu's tax policies kept the empire's wheels greased, the Silk Road provided the fuel for its economic engine. So, as much as the Han Dynasty's success was built on the strategic genius of its rulers, it was also a story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. It was the merchants, the camel herders, and the artisans who turned the dream of a connected world into reality. They were the unsung heroes who braved deserts and mountains, all in the name of trade and profit. In the end, the Han Dynasty's economic policies under Emperor Wu were a complex tapestry of ambition, innovation, and let's face it, a bit of exploitation. They laid the foundations for a prosperous empire, but they also remind us that economic progress often comes at a cost. While Wu's taxes may have funded imperial glory, they also burdened the common folk who bore the brunt of his ambitions. And while the Silk Road opened doors to new worlds, it also highlighted the stark inequalities of the time. As we move forward with this story, remember that the Han Dynasty wasn't just about emperors in palaces. It was about the countless individuals who contributed to its legacy. From the peasants in the fields to the merchants on the Silk Road, each played a part in shaping this golden age. So, let's keep the momentum building as we dive deeper into the intricacies of this fascinating period. As we pivot from the bustling trade routes of the Silk Road to the finer strokes of the Han Dynasty's legacy, let's talk about something that doesn't involve military conquests or taxing the bejesus out of salt and iron. Instead, picture a cultural and scientific renaissance that's as dazzling as a fireworks display on Chinese New Year, minus the Leonardo da Vinci's and Michelangelo's. This was an era where creativity and innovation were not just buzzwords, but the beating heart of the empire. Now, if you think the Renaissance was the only time humans decided to get smart, think again. The Han Dynasty was a hotbed of intellectual fireworks long before European artists started doodling cherubs on ceilings. The Chinese were busy revolutionizing the way people understood the world, and they weren't just doing it for the aesthetic. Enter Zhang Heng, a man who was basically the love child of Einstein and Mac Jiver. Born in 78 CE, Zhang was a polymath whose brain was a powerhouse of ideas. He didn't just dabble in one field. He was the original multitasker, juggling astronomy, mathematics, and engineering like they were his personal hobbies. Forget about spinning plates. This guy was spinning entire celestial spheres in his mind. Zhang Heng's piece de resistance, the seismometer, a device so ahead of its time it might as well have been dropped in from a sci-fi movie. Picture a bronze vessel resembling an ornate vase, adorned with 8 dragon heads perched around its rim. This wasn't just for decoration. Each dragon had a metal ball in its mouth, poised to drop into the mouth of a toad below. Why, you ask? Because when an earthquake hit, the right dragon would lose its marbles, literally. The direction the ball dropped indicated the quake's origin, giving the ancient Chinese a head start on disaster response. This wasn't just about saving lives. It was about understanding the Earth's mighty temper tantrums. Zhang Heng's device could detect earthquakes over 500 kilometers away, a feat that would have made him the rock star of early seismology. Talk about having your ear to the ground. Zhang Heng had the whole empire's ear to the ground. But let's not stop at tremors and tectonics. The Han Dynasty was also the birthplace of a little invention that's probably sitting in your printer right now: paper. Before this game changer hit the scene, scholars were scribbling on bamboo strips or silk. Imagine trying to write an epic poem on something as rigid as a wooden plank or as costly as a silk scarf. Not exactly conducive to spontaneous bursts of creativity, right? Around 105 CE, Kai Lun, a humble court official, decided enough was enough. Channeling his inner innovator, he concocted a method to make paper from mulberry bark, hemp, old rags, and fishnets. Yes, fishnets. This wasn't a Pinterest DIY project. It was a revolution in literacy. Suddenly, ideas could flow as freely as the Yellow River, unhindered by the constraints of cumbersome materials. Paper didn't just change the game. It flipped the board. It democratized knowledge, making it accessible to more than just the elite. Scholars could now jot down their musings without worrying about the cost of materials. It was like handing out free megaphones in a society that had been whispering for centuries. And let's be real, how many of us would have scribbled our brilliant ideas on bamboo if we'd lived back then? Probably not many. This surge in knowledge sharing fostered an intellectual environment where Confucianism could flourish alongside innovations in science and technology. The Han Dynasty became a crucible where ideas were tested and refined, a bit like a giant think tank with imperial backing. And much like today's tech startups, the folks behind these breakthroughs were driven by a mix of curiosity and necessity. The result was a society that was as rich in culture as it was in economic power. While the Silk Road was busy turning merchants into moguls, the intellectual roads were paving paths to enlightenment. This was an era where astronomy, medicine, and engineering saw advancements, that would influence cultures far beyond China's borders. Think of it as the Han Dynasty's version of going viral, ideas spreading like wildfire, but with a bit more longevity. However, let's not wrap this up in a neat little bow of romanticism. Behind every invention and intellectual leap was a reality that wasn't always pretty. The pressure to innovate often came from the top, where emperors saw technological advancements as a means to consolidate power and control. Yes, there were eureka moments, but they were often driven by the iron hand of imperial ambition. And as much as we love a good success story, it's crucial to acknowledge the people whose names didn't make it into the history books. The artisans, the laborers, the unsung heroes who actually built and tested these groundbreaking devices. Without them, Zhang Heng's seismometer would have remained a sketch in a dusty scroll. They were the lifeblood of the Han Dynasty's golden age, even if history often overlooks their contributions. So, as we marvel at the Han Dynasty's scientific and cultural prowess, let's remember the bigger picture. This wasn't just a period of dazzling achievements. It was a complex tapestry woven with threads of ambition, necessity, and ingenuity. The era's advancements were as much about survival as they were about curiosity, a testament to human resilience and creativity in the face of challenges. From seismometers to paper, the Han Dynasty was a beacon of human potential, a reminder that even in times of political and economic strife, the human spirit can soar to incredible heights. And as we continue our journey through this fascinating period, let's keep our eyes peeled for the next chapter in this epic saga, one that promises even more intrigue and innovation. Stay tuned, because the story of the Han Dynasty is far from over. As we continue our journey through the vast tapestry of the Han Dynasty, it's time to roll up our sleeves and dig into the gritty realities of daily life. And trust me, it was anything but a leisurely stroll through a bamboo grove. While the emperors and scholars were busy making history, the average Han citizen was navigating a world where social hierarchies were as rigid as a Confucian classroom. Let's start with the backbone of Han society, the farmers. In a world where the emperor's decrees could make or break your livelihood, farming was both a noble calling and a back-breaking ordeal. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of being a startup founder. High risk, high reward, but mostly just high risk. Around 90% of the population was engaged in agriculture, and while they were theoretically revered in Confucian ideology, in practice, their lives were a constant battle against nature and taxation. Imagine waking up at the crack of dawn, not to sip artisanal coffee, but to till fields that were as stubborn as a donkey on a hot day. Now, here's a fun fact to chew on. A farmer's tax burden could easily consume up to 1/3 of their harvest. Yes, you heard that right. The state had a knack for reaching into farmers' granaries with the same enthusiasm as a kid in a candy store. And let's not even get started on the corvée labor system, where farmers were periodically conscripted to work on state projects like the Great Wall or the Emperor's latest pet project. It was like being drafted into a construction crew with 0 days off and no health benefits. But despite these hardships, being a farmer was considered a noble pursuit. Confucius himself would have nodded approvingly at their toil, likening it to a moral duty. It was the classic case of romanticizing the struggle while conveniently ignoring the blisters and calloused hands. After all, someone had to keep the empire fed, and it wasn't going to be the silk-robed scholars debating philosophy over their morning tea. Speaking of scholars, let's pivot to the intellectual elite, who were more likely to break a sweat over an ink brush than a plow. These were the mandarins, the bureaucratic class who ran the empire like a well-oiled machine, or at least tried to, when they weren't embroiled in the philosophical debates of the day. Picture this: Confucians and legalists locking horns over governance like the ancient equivalent of a social media spat, but with more gravitas and fewer cat memes. The Confucians were all about moral rectitude and benevolent rule. They believed in leading by example, which sounds great on paper, but is a bit like expecting your smartphone to teach you patience. The legalists, on the other hand, were the realists of the day. They argued for strict laws and harsh punishments, under the assumption that people were inherently self-serving and needed a good dose of discipline to toe the line. It was a philosophical clash for the ages, with each side accusing the other of being out of touch with reality. While these debates raged on, the real question was, How did the Han manage to keep internal conflicts from tearing the empire apart? Well, like any good drama, it was a mix of strategic marriages, military might, and a dash of good old-fashioned diplomacy. The emperor's court was a veritable chessboard, with alliances forged and broken faster than you could say imperial intrigue. Strategic marriages were the currency of power, binding families together in a tangled web of obligation and ambition. It was a bit like Game of Thrones, but with more silk and fewer dragons. And what of women in this grand tableau? While they were often relegated to the background in historical narratives, their roles were far from insignificant. Women in Han China were expected to manage the household and produce heirs, a role that came with its own set of pressures and expectations. But let's not write them off as mere footnotes. In reality, women wielded influence behind the curtains, often acting as advisors to their husbands, or stepping into power vacuums when the men were off on imperial business, or, dead. Take Empress Liu Zhai, for example, who was no stranger to the political arena. After Liu Bang's death, she maneuvered her way through the treacherous waters of court politics with the skill of a seasoned diplomat. She effectively ruled as regent, asserting control over the empire while pushing her family's interests to the forefront. This wasn't just about keeping the throne warm. It was about shaping the future in a male-dominated world. So, how did the Han manage to keep the peace, or at least a semblance of it, across such a sprawling empire? The answer lies in a combination of military presence and infrastructure development. The empire maintained a formidable army, stationed at key points to deter rebellions and invasions, but they didn't rely solely on the sword. The Han were adept at building roads and canals, creating a network that facilitated not just trade, but also the swift movement of troops. It was like an ancient version of FedEx, but with soldiers instead of packages. The government also employed a policy of Hekin, marriage alliances with neighboring nomadic tribes, to keep potential threats at bay. It was diplomacy with a bridal bouquet, marrying off princesses to nomadic chieftains in exchange for peace. Of course, this wasn't a foolproof strategy. Nomadic tribes were known to break these agreements as often as they upheld them, leading to skirmishes along the borders that kept the Han military on their toes. In the grand scheme of things, the Han Dynasty was a complex web of social hierarchies, philosophical debates, and geopolitical maneuvering. It was an era where the glittering veneer of imperial power often masked the harsh realities faced by its citizens. But it was also a period of resilience and adaptability, where people from all walks of life played their part in sustaining an empire that would leave a lasting legacy. As we continue this historical odyssey, keep in mind that the Han Dynasty wasn't just a monolithic entity ruled by emperors. It was a living, breathing organism, shaped by the lives and struggles of countless individuals. And with that, we'll leave the story open for the next chapter in this epic saga, where more twists and turns await in the annals of Han history. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. Now, as we prepare to wrap up our whirlwind tour through the Han Dynasty, let's tackle the elephant in the room, the decline. Because in the grand narrative of history, even the mightiest empires have a sell-by date, and the Han Dynasty was no exception. Picture this, an empire that once sprawled over 6 million square kilometers now grappling with its own bloated bureaucracy, corruption that would make modern-day scandals look like petty misdemeanors, and internal strife that could rival a Shakespearean tragedy. First up, let's talk about bureaucratic bloat. By the end of the Han Dynasty, the government had more officials than you could shake a bamboo stick at. We're talking about an administrative structure that had more layers than a milfoil pastry. And just like an overstuffed pastry, it was bound to crumble. The Han government had upwards of 130,000 officials on the payroll, which might sound like a job creation miracle, until you realize that many were as useful as a chocolate teapot. These officials often spent more time lining their own pockets than actually governing, turning corruption into a fine art. The tax system, once a miracle of economic strategy under Liu Bang, had become a convoluted mess. Tax collectors were notorious for pocketing more than their fair share, leaving the peasants with about as much grain as a pigeon on a diet. It's no wonder that revolts started bubbling up like a pot of rice left on the stove for too long. The red eyebrows and the yellow turbans, rebellious groups named for their distinctive headgear and face paint, weren't just fashionistas, with a penchant for accessorizing. They were the disgruntled masses fed up with the status quo. Their uprisings were a clear sign that the empire was teetering on the edge of a very steep, very slippery slope. Meanwhile, the imperial court was a cauldron of intrigue and backstabbing. Emperors were often more interested in palace politics than in the actual running of the empire. The eunuchs, those power-hungry intermediaries who were to the Han court what caffeine is to a Monday morning, wielded more influence than was probably healthy for anyone involved. They played a game of political chess where the stakes were life and death, and unsurprisingly, this didn't do wonders for the stability of the realm. But let's not just blame the bureaucrats and the eunuchs. Mother Nature also had a bone to pick with the Han dynasty. Natural disasters like floods, droughts, and locust plagues became regular guests at the empire's door, each leaving behind a trail of destruction akin to a rock star's dressing room. These calamities further strained an already stretched economy and eroded the people's faith in their rulers. After all, in ancient times, the emperor was seen as the son of heaven, and when heaven was displeased, it was usually the emperor's head that ended up on the chopping block, figuratively speaking, of course. Amid this chaos, the Han dynasty began to fracture. By 220 C, the once unified empire splintered into the three kingdoms, each vying for control like siblings fighting over the last slice of mooncake. This period was so tumultuous and legendary that it inspired countless tales and TV dramas, because who doesn't love a bit of historical soap opera? Despite its rather dramatic decline, the Han dynasty left behind a legacy as enduring as the Great Wall itself. Its cultural and political influences are woven into the very fabric of China's identity today. Confucianism, bolstered by the Han emperors, became the cornerstone of Chinese education and governance for centuries to come. The idea of a centralized bureaucracy, albeit one in need of a serious declutter, set the template for future dynasties. And let's not forget the innovations in science and technology that laid the groundwork for future breakthroughs. The Han dynasty's story is a testament to the cyclical nature of history, where power, once gained, is never permanent, and where the seeds of decline are often sown during times of prosperity. It's a reminder that even the greatest achievements can't insulate an empire from the whims of fate and the machinations of men. So, as we draw the curtain on this chapter of history, let's take a moment to appreciate the duality of the Han dynasty. It was an era of monumental achievements and equally monumental failures, a golden age that shone brightly, even as it was eclipsed by the shadows of its own making. The Han dynasty's legacy is not just in its accomplishments, but in its cautionary tales, reminding us that the past is not just a foreign country, but a mirror reflecting the complexities of human nature. And there you have it, folks. The Han dynasty, a saga of triumph and turmoil, innovation and inertia, brilliance and bureaucracy. It's a story that continues to echo through the ages, a testament to the enduring dance between power and politics, humanity and hubris. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history, and remember, history isn't just about the past. It's a lens through which we can better understand the present. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and never stop learning. Once upon a time, in a world before Starbucks loyalty cards and Instagram influencers, there were the Phoenicians, masters of the ancient hustle. These folks weren't your average flea market vendors. No, they were the Mediterranean's answer to Wall Street brokers, trading goods like purple dye and glassware with the kind of finesse that would make Gordon Gekko blush. Their city-states, like Tyre and Sidon, were the bustling hubs of economic activity, straddling the coastlines of what we now call Lebanon. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're here to unravel the mystery of how these seafaring merchants became the ancient equivalent of Amazon Prime, minus the overnight delivery. First, a little geography lesson. The Phoenicians were nestled along a narrow strip of land that strategically hugged the Mediterranean Sea. This wasn't just any prime real estate. It was the epicenter of trade routes connecting the East with the West. Think of them as the middlemen between the ancient world's fashion capitals. They didn't just sit on their hands waiting for business. They built ships, lots of them. The Phoenicians were to shipbuilding what Steve Jobs was to sleek technology. Their vessels were fast, reliable, and most importantly, capable of navigating the treacherous waters of the Mediterranean with ease. Let's zoom in on Tyre and Sidon, the Bay and Say and Jay-Z of Phoenician city-states. Tyre, famously perched on an island just off the coast, was a fortress of commerce. It was here that the Phoenicians mastered the art of the deal in purple dye, a color so exclusive that it might as well have been labeled royalty only. This dye, known as Tyrian purple, was extracted from the murex snail, and the process was about as glamorous as it sounds. Picture thousands of snails, painstakingly harvested and boiled to produce just a small amount of dye. It was labor-intensive, smelly, and time-consuming, but it was worth it. Why? Because purple was the ancient world's equivalent of a Rolex, a status symbol worn by emperors, kings, and anyone who wanted to flaunt their wealth without saying a word. Now, you might be wondering, were these guys just glorified traders? The romantic myth paints them as simple merchants peddling wares across the sea, but in reality, they were cultural influencers before that was even a thing. They didn't just trade goods, they traded ideas, technology, and even the alphabet. Yes, you heard that right. The Phoenicians are credited with developing one of the world's earliest alphabets, which spread like wildfire across the Mediterranean. This innovation wasn't just about efficiency. It was a game changer, facilitating communication and record-keeping on a scale previously unimaginable. In other words, they were the unsung heroes of ancient literacy. Debunking the myth of the Phoenicians as mere traders reveals their role as technological pioneers. Their ships weren't just floating bazaars. They were cutting-edge vessels equipped with advanced navigational techniques. The Phoenicians had a knack for reading the stars, understanding weather patterns, and charting unknown waters. They were the GPS of their time, minus the soothing voice directing you at every turn. This expertise allowed them to establish trade routes that stretched from the British Isles to North Africa and beyond, making them a powerful force in the ancient world's economic landscape. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Phoenicians were also savvy businessmen who understood the value of exclusivity. They kept their trade secrets under lock and key, ensuring that their purple dye remained the Versace of colors. They weren't above manipulating the market either, often creating demand by limiting supply. It's a tactic still used today by luxury brands, proving that some things never change. In a world where might often made right, the Phoenicians wielded their economic influence like a sword, building relationships and occasionally rivalries. Their interactions with powerful neighbors like Egypt and Assyria were a delicate dance of diplomacy and commerce. They provided these empires with goods, from precious metals to timber, crucial for building palaces and war machines, all while maintaining their autonomy. It was a balancing act worthy of a Cirque du Soleil performance. Despite their prowess, the Phoenicians were not invincible. They faced challenges from larger empires and pirates that prowled the seas, eager to plunder their ships. Yet, their resilience and cunning saw them through, allowing their culture to leave an indelible mark on history. As we unravel the layers of Phoenician influence, it becomes clear that their legacy is not just in what they traded, but in how they transformed the very fabric of the Mediterranean world. So, next time you see something in royal purple, give a nod to the ancient Phoenicians, the original masters of marketing and innovation. In the grand tapestry of history, the Phoenicians were the vibrant thread that connected disparate cultures, introducing new ideas and technologies that would shape civilizations for centuries to come. They were the silent architects of progress, their influence echoing through the ages, reminding us that sometimes the most powerful forces are those we cannot see. And speaking of those silent architects of progress, let's delve into the Phoenicians' globe-trotting adventures, or should I say, seafaring escapades, across the ancient world. This wasn't your average Mediterranean cruise with a buffet and a deck chair. The Phoenicians were navigating some serious trade routes, stretching their influence from the sunlit shores of the Iberian Peninsula all the way to the bustling bazaars of Mesopotamia. These routes were the arteries of ancient commerce, pumping goods, ideas, and cultures across continents with all the precision and risk you'd expect from a high-stakes game of nautical chess. First, let's talk logistics. The Phoenicians weren't just barbing about aimlessly on the sea. Oh no, these folks had a master plan. Their ships, marvels of ancient engineering, were the perfect blend of speed and cargo capacity. Think of them as the ancient FedEx fleet, minus the tracking numbers, but with a whole lot more character. These ships, known as biremes and triremes, were sleek, fast, and sturdy, capable of carrying up to 100 tons of goods on a single voyage. They were the backbone of the Phoenician economy, their design so effective that it influenced shipbuilding for centuries. Now, if you were a Phoenician trader, you'd kick off your journey from Tyre or Sidon, loaded with goods like that infamous Tyrian purple dye, high-quality glassware, and cedarwood that was the envy of architects everywhere. Setting sail westward, your first major stop might be the Iberian Peninsula, a veritable treasure trove of silver and gold. The Iberian mines were like the ATMs of the ancient world, dispensing precious metals to those savvy enough to navigate the rugged coastlines and complex trade negotiations. But why stop there? The Phoenicians were nothing if not adventurous, so they'd push north to the British Isles in search of tin, a key component for making bronze. Yes, that's right. These ancient mariners were essentially the OG metalheads. Tin from Britain was a hot commodity, and the Phoenicians were more than willing to brave the chilly North Atlantic to get their hands on it. Imagine rolling up to Britain in your finely crafted ship, trading Mediterranean luxury goods for some good old British tin, a deal that would make even the savviest Wall Street trader nod in approval. Of course, no great adventure comes without its perils. The Phoenicians had to contend with the ever-present threat of piracy. Pirates in the Mediterranean were about as common as tourists in Times Square, everywhere, and usually up to no good. These sea bandits were the bane of any trader's existence, lurking in hidden coves, ready to pounce on unsuspecting vessels. And if the pirates didn't get you, Mother Nature just might. Storms on the Mediterranean could turn a pleasant voyage into a tempestuous nightmare in the blink of an eye. Imagine navigating through rough seas with nothing but the stars to guide you. It required a combination of skill, bravery, and perhaps a touch of madness. But the Phoenicians, ever the pragmatic sailors, were prepared. They honed their navigation skills to a fine art, using the North Star as their trusty guide. This celestial navigation was their version of Google Maps, albeit with a few more risks involved. And they didn't just rely on the stars. These savvy sailors understood the intricacies of wind patterns, currents, and even the behavior of migratory birds. They were astronomers, meteorologists, and biologists rolled into one, a testament to their ingenuity and adaptability. Now, let's not overlook the economic symphony playing behind the scenes. Every Phoenician voyage was meticulously calculated, a delicate balance of risk versus reward. The cost of building a ship, supplying it with goods, and manning it with a skilled crew was a significant investment, but the potential profits, astronomical. A successful venture could yield returns that would make a modern-day venture capitalist swoon. This economic acumen was what set the Phoenicians apart, transforming them from mere traders into the financial powerhouses of their time. Despite these risks, the Phoenicians' trade routes flourished, creating a network that connected disparate cultures and economies. Their ships were the threads weaving the tapestry of the ancient world, carrying not just goods, but also ideas and innovations. The Phoenicians were the great connectors, their influence stretching far beyond the horizon. And yet, for all their successes, the Phoenicians were not immune to the whims of fate and fortune. Their legacy, while formidable, was also fragile, constantly threatened by the geopolitical machinations of larger empires and the unpredictable nature of the seas they sailed. But if history has taught us anything, it's that the Phoenicians' daring and determination left an indelible mark on the world, a testament to the power of human ingenuity and the unyielding spirit of exploration. As we continue to unravel the intricacies of Phoenician trade, remember that their story is not just about commerce, but about the relentless pursuit of knowledge, the courage to venture into the unknown, and the resilience to overcome whatever challenges the ancient world threw their way. So, next time you marvel at a map or gaze up at the stars, spare a thought for those intrepid Phoenicians, the original navigators of the Mediterranean, whose legacy continues to inspire adventurers and dreamers alike. Now, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of Phoenician economics, the art of making a buck ancient style. For those of you thinking the Phoenicians just tossed some purple dye onto ships and watched the gold roll in, prepare for a reality check. This was no leisurely jaunt across the Mediterranean. It was a high-stakes game of trade poker, where every move was calculated, and every piece of cargo was a potential jackpot, or a financial belly flop. First up, let's talk about the cost of goods. The Phoenicians weren't just peddling seashell necklaces and cheap trinkets. Their wares were the luxury goods of the ancient world, akin to the Louis Vuittons and Rolexes of today. That Tyrian purple dye, for instance, was worth its weight in gold, literally. It took a staggering 10,000 murex snails to produce just 1 gram of dye. Imagine the logistics. Thousands of slimy snails, all sacrificed for a single splash of color. It was a niche market, but boy, did it pay dividends. We're talking a markup that would make even the sharpest modern entrepreneur's jaw drop. And then there was the glassware. Oh, the glassware. The Phoenicians were the original glass blowers, long before Etsy made it cool. Their glass products were highly sought after, and they didn't come cheap. The cost of raw materials, combined with the skill required to craft these delicate pieces, meant that only the wealthiest could afford them. In a world where most people were still using clay parts, owning Phoenician glass was a serious flex. But trading luxury goods wasn't just about setting sail with a cargo hold full of merchandise. There were massive upfront costs to consider. Building a single ship could set you back a small fortune. We're talking hundreds of thousands of silver shekels, not to mention the cost of maintaining a crew capable of navigating the treacherous Mediterranean waters. And let's not forget the costs of protection. Pirates weren't just a nuisance, they were a constant threat. Hiring mercenaries or paying tribute for safe passage was often necessary, adding yet another layer to the Phoenicians' economic balancing act. Now, let's sail into the economic impact on the regions involved in this ancient web of commerce. The Phoenicians weren't just taking their fancy goods on a world tour for fun. Their trade networks stimulated local economies wherever they docked. When a Phoenician ship arrived in a port, it was like Black Friday descended upon the local marketplace. They brought not just goods, but also wealth, jobs, and a taste of the exotic, the ancient version of a blockbuster movie premiere. Their presence also had ripple effects on the local political scene. Many coastal cities and kingdoms were eager to form alliances with these maritime maestros. Having a Phoenician trade agreement was like securing a seat at the cool kids' table in the ancient geopolitical cafeteria. However, maintaining these alliances was no small feat. The Phoenicians had to be as shrewd in diplomacy as they were in commerce, keeping powerful neighbors like Egypt and Assyria happy while ensuring their own independence was a tightrope walk worthy of any diplomatic acrobat. The Phoenicians' ability to navigate these murky political waters was nothing short of remarkable. They were the Switzerland of the ancient world, neutral, independent, and indispensable. They managed to keep their trade empire afloat in a turbulent geopolitical sea, thanks to a combination of savvy negotiations, strategic marriages, and the occasional well-placed bribe. It's a playbook that many modern nations would do well to study. Despite their successes, the Phoenicians were not immune to the economic pressures of their time. Inflation, supply chain disruptions, and shifting political alliances could all throw a wrench into their finely tuned economic machine. Yet they adapted with a resilience that was nothing short of legendary. When one trade route closed, they simply found another. When one product fell out of favor, they innovated and diversified. Their ability to pivot in response to changing circumstances was perhaps their greatest strength, a lesson in adaptability that remains relevant to this day. In sum, the Phoenicians were a testament to the power of trade as a driver of economic growth and cultural exchange. They were the original globetrotters, their ships serving as the highways of the ancient world. Their legacy is not just in the goods they traded, but in the economic and cultural connections they forged across continents. They were the unsung architects of globalization, long before the term was ever coined. So, as we continue to explore the fascinating world of Phoenician trade, remember that behind every ship, every transaction, and every diplomatic overture was a complex web of economic calculations, political maneuvers, and human ambition. The Phoenicians were more than just traders. They were the economic engine of the ancient world, propelling cultures into contact and leaving an indelible mark on history that resonates to this day. So, while the Phoenicians were busy being the Jeff Bezos of antiquity, they were also channeling their inner Shakespeare, without the quills, of course. The Phoenicians weren't just trading goods, they were trading culture, ideas, and wait for it, the alphabet. That's right, these maritime maestros were the literary trailblazers of the ancient world, spreading their script faster than a cat video goes viral. Let's dive into the alphabet soup, shall we? Around 1050 BCE, the Phoenicians concocted a 22-character alphabet that was less about hieroglyphic squiggles and more about practical communication. This wasn't just an academic exercise, it was a linguistic revolution. Unlike the complex cuneiform or hieroglyphs that required a Rosetta Stone-level genius to decipher, the Phoenician alphabet was accessible enough for your average Joe. Well, let's call him Joe Shen in this case. By simplifying writing, they democratized literacy, making it possible for merchants to scribble down IOUs without needing a translator or a degree in ancient languages. And boy, did this script travel. From Greece to Rome, the Phoenician alphabet was the gift that kept on giving. It was like the ancient version of an open-source code. Everybody borrowed it, modified it, and made it their own. The Greeks added vowels. The Romans tweaked it further. And voila, here we are, typing away on keyboards using letters that trace their lineage back to those early Phoenician scribbles. So next time you send a text, thank the Phoenicians for sparing you from the agony of deciphering hieroglyphs. But the alphabet was just the beginning. The Phoenicians were the cultural conduits of the Mediterranean, spreading art and religious ideas like they were ancient Instagram influencers. Picture this. Phoenician traders rolling up to a foreign shore, not just hawking their wares, but also showcasing their artistic flair. Their pottery, adorned with intricate designs, became all the rage, setting trends in aesthetics that would ripple across the ancient world. These weren't mere knickknacks, they were cultural artifacts, each piece a testament to Phoenician craftsmanship and creativity. And then there were the religious ideas. The Phoenicians were polytheists, worshipping a pantheon that included deities like Baal and Astarte. Their religious practices often involved elaborate rituals that were as much a spectacle as a spiritual experience. When they sailed into foreign ports, they didn't just bring goods, but also tales of their gods and religious customs. This cross-pollination of beliefs laid the groundwork for a more interconnected spiritual landscape in the Mediterranean, where gods and myths were as likely to travel as the goods exchanged in bustling markets. But let's not sugarcoat it. For all their cultural contributions, the Phoenicians were also practical to a fault. They knew their art and religion were as much a commodity as their purple dye. Cultural exchange wasn't just a happy accident, it was a strategy. By spreading their alphabet and art, they facilitated trade and diplomacy, creating a network of shared ideas and mutual understanding. This was cultural capital at its finest, an investment in shared human experience that paid dividends in trade deals and political alliances. Yet, behind the romantic vision of the Phoenicians as cultural ambassadors lies a harsher reality. Their influence was not always welcome, and their presence could stir conflict. Some local cultures viewed them as intrusive, and their religious practices occasionally clashed with indigenous beliefs. The Phoenicians had to navigate these cultural clashes with the same deft touch they used to steer their ships through stormy seas. In this delicate dance of diplomacy and cultural exchange, the Phoenicians proved themselves to be the master jugglers of their time. They managed to maintain their cultural identity while simultaneously absorbing and disseminating the influences of the regions they touched. This ability to adapt and innovate while preserving their core traditions was a testament to their resilience and ingenuity. As we wrap up this whirlwind tour of Phoenician culture, remember that their legacy is a blend of legend and reality, a story of ambitious traders who were also pioneers of cultural integration. They were the architects of an ancient world that was more interconnected than we might imagine, laying the foundations for a Mediterranean melting pot that would continue to evolve long after their sails disappeared over the horizon. So, next time you pen a letter, admire a piece of art, or ponder the diverse pantheons of ancient religions, give a nod to the Phoenicians, the unsung influencers who shaped the course of history with every voyage, every trade, and every cultural exchange. As we leave their shores, let's keep our eyes on the horizon, ready to uncover more tales of ancient innovation and enduring legacy. And just like that, we've traced the Phoenicians' journey from savvy traders to cultural trendsetters. But how did these real-world go-getters become the stuff of legend, whispered in the corridors of history and often shrouded in mystery? It's time to dig into the archaeological and historical archives to separate fact from fiction and let me tell you, it's a tale as tangled as a ship's rigging in a storm. First, let's talk tombstones, or more accurately, the lack thereof. One reason why the Phoenicians often slip through the historical cracks is their peculiar relationship with documentation. Unlike their neighbors, the Egyptians, who immortalized themselves on every passable surface, or the Greeks, who seem to publish every thought like ancient blagas, the Phoenicians were more like the secretive startup, keeping the juicy details under wraps. Much of what we know about them comes from outsiders, Greeks, Romans, and others who may not have been impartial Yelp reviewers, if you catch my drift. Archaeological findings in places like Byblos, Tyre, and Sidon provide some solid ground amid the murky waters of myth. These sites give us tantalizing glimpses into Phoenician life, trade records etched in stone, remnants of their famed purple dye workshops, and ports bustling with the ghosts of ancient commerce. Byblos, often referred to as one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, is a testament to the Phoenicians' knack for choosing prime real estate. The ruins here whisper stories of a civilization that was as resilient as it was resourceful, weathering the tides of time with the kind of grit that would make any modern entrepreneur proud. But here's where the plot thickens. The very success of the Phoenicians also sowed the seeds of their mythologization. Their rivals, particularly the Greeks, spun tales that portrayed them as cunning, shrewd, and sometimes downright unscrupulous merchants. These stories, rich in exaggeration, painted the Phoenicians as both admired and feared, a bit like the Wall Street wolves of antiquity, if you will. Herodotus, the so-called father of history, often depicted them as the ultimate deal-makers. But remember, his accounts are more akin to a juicy tabloid than a peer-reviewed article. One of the most persistent myths is the notion of the Phoenicians as the original discoverers of America. Yes, you heard that right. According to some speculative theories, the Phoenicians may have crossed the Atlantic long before Columbus ever set sail. While this makes for a riveting campfire story, the archaeological evidence is, let's say, less than overwhelming. No Phoenician amphorae have turned up in pre-Columbian layers in the Americas, making this tale more of a maritime myth than historical reality. But hey, it's a nice thought. Those Phoenicians, ever the adventurous bunch, setting sail for the unknown. It's the kind of story that captures the imagination, even if it's more fiction than fact. The legacy of the Phoenicians is a complex tapestry woven from threads of innovation, trade, and cultural exchange. Their influence stretched far and wide, from the Iberian Peninsula to the shores of North Africa. They were the original purveyors of globalization. Their trade networks a precursor to the interconnected world we know today. Yet, their story is often overshadowed by the empires that followed, the Romans, Greeks, and others who left more indelible marks on the historical record. So, were the Phoenicians the unsung architects of the modern world, their innovations the foundation upon which later civilizations built? Or were they just a really successful ancient startup, rising and falling like so many before and after them? It's a bit of both, really. They were the bridge builders of their time, connecting disparate cultures and economies with the deftness of a tightrope walker. Their alphabets, trade routes, and technological advances didn't just enrich their own coffers. They laid the groundwork for a more interconnected world. They were the silent partners in the great historical enterprise. Their influence felt long after their cities had crumbled into dust. And perhaps that's their greatest legacy, an enduring influence that transcends the bounds of time, reminding us that sometimes the most profound impacts are made by those who leave the fewest traces. In conclusion, the Phoenicians were more than just the ancient equivalent of Amazon Prime. They were the pioneers of trade, culture, and innovation, their sails disappearing over the horizon, but their legacy firmly anchored in the annals of history. So, next time you spot something in royal purple or jot down a quick note using the alphabet, tip your hat to the Phoenicians. They may not have carved their stories into stone, but their impact is etched into the very fabric of our civilization. And in the grand scheme of things, isn't that the most enduring legend of all? The Hittites. Now there's a name that doesn't pop up on your average historical pop quiz, but these guys were the original Iron Age influencers. Think of them as the punk rockers crashing the Bronze Age's meticulously organized symphony. Around 1600 BCE, in what we now call Turkey, a group of Anatolian upstarts decided they weren't content with just getting by. No, they wanted to make a splash bigger than a cannonball at a pool party. Our story kicks off with their mysterious origins. Picture a ragtag assembly of tribes, each with their own dialects and quirks, somehow uniting under a shared ambition to build an empire that would be the envy of all. The Hittites didn't just stumble onto the historical stage. They stormed it with an audacity that would make any modern startup founder blush. Their secret weapon, mastery of iron smelting. Yep, while everyone else was still obsessed with bronze, the Hittites were busy smelting away, giving them a technological edge that was harder than a Turkish delight fresh out of the oven. Iron was to the Hittites what the internet was to the late 20th century. It meant better weapons, stronger tools, and the kind of economic power that makes you the heavyweight champ in a world still swinging with bronze gloves. With iron, they could craft chariots that weren't just for show. They were the ancient equivalent of a Ferrari, fast and deadly. This was the kind of innovation that had their neighbors shaking in their bronze boots. But before they could start throwing their weight around, they needed a base of operations. Enter Harusa, the Hittite capital, a city that was as much a fortress as it was a metropolis. Built in a strategically enviable position, Harusa was surrounded by thick stone walls that whispered, "Do not mess with us," to any would-be invaders. And let's not forget the impressive Lion Gate, monumental entrance that shouted prestige and power louder than any modern-day billboard. Despite their successes, the Hittites were not exactly the darlings of destiny. Their narrative is peppered with enough myth and legend to make a Marvel movie script seem like a documentary. Take their so-called great kings, for instance, often portrayed as heroic figures in ancient texts. But let's peel back the veneer for a moment. These kings were more than just charismatic leaders. They were also ruthless strategists who understood that maintaining an empire was a logistical nightmare of epic proportions. We're talking about managing vast territories, diverse populations, and enough political intrigue to rival a season of Game of Thrones. Running an empire wasn't all glory and ironclad strength. It required the kind of day-to-day grind that would make a modern CEO cry into their organic kombucha. The Hittite rulers had to deal with everything from grain shortages to border skirmishes, not to mention keeping the local nobility happy. A single misstep could spell disaster, and losing control of the narrative was as dangerous as losing a battle. Now, let's talk myths. The romanticized tales of the Hittite kings paint them as larger-than-life figures, but the truth is a bit less glamorous. Sure, they led armies and forged alliances, but they also engaged in enough backstabbing and double-dealing to fill a Shakespearean tragedy. These rulers had to be shrewd, often relying on diplomacy as much as on warfare to keep their empire intact. And while the legends might say otherwise, there wasn't much room for nobility in the harsh game of ancient geopolitics. The Hittites' rise was not just a story of military might. It was a testament to their ability to adapt and innovate in a rapidly changing world. They didn't just ride the wave of the Iron Age, they helped shape it. By mastering iron smelting, they set themselves up as pioneers, not just in warfare, but in the broader strokes of history. The question isn't just how they did it, but why it mattered. In a time when most civilizations were content to stick with what they knew, the Hittites dared to innovate, to push the boundaries of what was possible. They were the disruptors of their day, and their legacy is one that echoes through the ages, reminding us that sometimes it's the upstarts who change the world. So, while the Hittites might not be as well known as the Egyptians or the Mesopotamians, their impact on history is undeniable. They were the unsung pioneers of an age that would change the face of warfare and technology forever. And as we delve deeper into their story, remember, history isn't just about the tales we tell, but the truths we uncover. The Hittites might have been the rock stars of their time, but behind the legend lies a gritty, fascinating reality that's just waiting to be explored. As the story unfolds, let's harp onto a Hittite chariot and gallop straight into their strategic genius. Imagine a chessboard sprawled across the ancient Near East, with the Hittites moving their pieces with the cunning of a master tactician. They weren't just expanding their territory for the sheer thrill of it. This was empire building with a purpose. Picture the Hittites eyeing their neighbors, Egypt and Babylon, not with envy, but as opportunities in their imperial game. They knew that to be a superpower, you had to do more than conquer land. You had to control the narrative and the resources. First stop, Egypt. The Hittites and Egyptians were like heavyweight boxers in an ancient ring, each throwing punches to claim dominance. This wasn't just a matter of ego. It was about controlling vital trade routes and resources. The famous Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE, for instance, wasn't just a clash of swords and chariots. It was a marketing campaign on steroids. Ramses Roman II, the Egyptian pharaoh, proclaimed a resounding victory. But the truth, much like an ancient game of telephone, was more nuanced. The battle was a tactical draw, and the subsequent peace treaty, one of history's first, highlighted the Hittites' knack for diplomacy. They turned a stalemate into an alliance, showcasing that sometimes the pen truly is mightier than the sword, or at least as mighty. Next up, Babylon. The Hittites didn't just knock on Babylon's door, they kicked it down with the force of an ironclad boot. Around 1595 BCE, they sacked the city, an event that sent shockwaves across the region. But this wasn't just about plunder. It was a calculated move to destabilize a rival power and assert dominance. The Hittites knew that the real currency of power was influence. By disrupting Babylon, they sent a clear message. The Hittites were a force to be reckoned with, a superpower not just by military might, but by strategic brilliance. Now, let's talk economics. Maintaining an empire wasn't all glorious battles and heroic tales. It was a logistical nightmare that would make even the most seasoned project manager break a sweat. Take the humble chariot, for instance, the Ferrari of the ancient battlefield. Each one cost about 500 shekels. Think of it as the down payment on a small house, making it a luxury for any army. This wasn't just a chariot. It was a statement piece, a symbol of status and technological prowess. But owning them was just the beginning. Keeping an army fed, equipped, and mobile required a supply chain that would rival Amazon during a holiday rush. The Hittites had to ensure a steady flow of grain, metals, and other essentials, a task that was as complex as any modern logistics operation. Feeding an army was no small feat either. The Hittite military machine was essentially a walking buffet line. A typical campaign might require thousands of bushels of grain, hundreds of cattle, and enough beer to keep morale high, not unlike a college football tailgate, but with higher stakes. The logistics behind these operations were a testament to the Hittites' organizational skills. They had to plan not just for battle, but for the supplies needed to sustain their troops over long campaigns. This wasn't just about brute force, it was about precise planning and execution. And then there's the political chess game. The Hittite kings weren't just warriors, they were diplomats and negotiators who understood the art of alliance building. They knew that keeping an empire together required more than just military might. It required alliances and marriages that could solidify power and influence. This was geopolitics at its finest, a delicate dance of power where a well-timed marriage or treaty could mean the difference between expansion and collapse. The costs of maintaining such an empire were immense, both in terms of resources and human capital. The Hittites had to balance the needs of their military with those of their civilian population. They had to ensure that their people were fed and their cities protected, all while waging campaigns that stretched their resources to the limit. This wasn't just about conquest. It was about creating a sustainable system that could support an empire's ambitions. In the grand tapestry of history, the Hittites remind us that the rise of a superpower isn't just about the battles won or the territories conquered. It's about the strategic brilliance and economic savvy that underpin those victories. They were more than just warriors. They were visionaries who understood the complexities of power and the intricate dance of diplomacy and warfare. As we continue to explore their legacy, remember that behind every legend is a reality as gritty and complex as the age they helped define. So, what was life really like in the Hittite Empire? Let's dive into the hustle and bustle of everyday Hittite society, where iron wasn't just a resource, but the lifeblood of an entire civilization. Farmers, merchants, scribes, and priests all played their roles in keeping the gears of this ancient machine well-oiled. We're not talking about a utopian commune where everyone sang cumbaya and shared their harvests. Nope, this was a complex web of interactions where every cog mattered, starting with the backbone of any ancient society, the farmers. Hittite farmers were the unsung heroes of the empire, toiling under the Anatolian sun to coax life from the earth. They weren't just planting seeds, They were laying the foundation for the empire's sustenance. Agriculture was a tough gig, with farmers facing everything from unpredictable weather to the whims of their overlords. Picture this. A farmer would sow wheat in April, hoping for a bumper crop come harvest time in September. But a bad season could turn that hope into a nightmare faster than you could say famine. And let's not forget the taxes. Hittite farmers were subject to a tax system that would make a modern IRS agent blush. Taxes were often paid in kind, with grain or livestock, and failure to cough up could lead to a swift visit from the local enforcers. So, while the image of a quaint pastoral life is tempting, the reality was as harsh as a Hittite winter. Then there were the merchants, the ancient equivalent of today's jet-setting entrepreneurs. These guys weren't just peddling goods, they were the conduits of cultural and economic exchange. They dealt in everything from metals to textiles, traveling along trade routes that stretched across the ancient Near East. The Hittites' mastery of iron smelting gave them a competitive edge in this arena. Iron tools and weapons were the hot commodities of the day, and Hittite merchants knew how to capitalize on this. A Hittite merchant might embark on a journey to Assyria, loaded with iron goods, returning with precious spices or luxury textiles. This wasn't a simple in-and-out transaction, though. It required negotiation skills that would put a modern-day used car salesman to shame. But behind the allure of trade was a constant threat of banditry and political instability, turning each journey into a high-stakes gamble. Meanwhile, scribes were the unsung tech wizards of the Hittite Empire. These were the folks who kept the bureaucratic wheels turning, armed with cuneiform tablets and an encyclopedic knowledge of regulations. In a world without Google, scribes were the walking Wikipedias, recording everything from legal decrees to grain inventories. The Hittites used a script borrowed from the Mesopotamians, a bit like using an ancient Excel spreadsheet to manage empire-wide data. Imagine the scene. A scribe hunched over a tablet, meticulously inscribing the king's latest decree while the ink dries, knowing a single mistake could mean a world of trouble. Scribes were vital in maintaining the empire's sprawling bureaucracy, ensuring that orders from the capital reached the farthest-flung corners of Hittite territory. But woe betide the scribe who fell out of favor or made an error in those all-important records. In the cutthroat world of Hittite administration, one wrong tablet could spell the end of a career, and perhaps even more. And then there were the priests, the spiritual gatekeepers, and intermediaries between the gods and mortals. The Hittites had a pantheon more crowded than a rock festival, with deities for everything from weather to war. Keeping the gods appeased was no small feat, and priests were tasked with performing rituals and ceremonies to ensure the empire's prosperity. These weren't just solemn affairs. They were vibrant spectacles involving music, dance, and offerings. A priest had to be part theologian, part performer, and all diplomat, ensuring that no deity felt neglected. But behind the incense and chants lay a more pragmatic reality. Temples were economic powerhouses, controlling vast tracts of land and resources. Priests wielded significant influence, acting as advisors to the king and arbiters in disputes, a role that could easily blur into politics. Now, let's talk about the iron elephant in the room. How did iron transform Hittite society? We've already touched on its military applications, but its impact went far beyond the battlefield. Iron tools revolutionized agriculture, making plowing and harvesting more efficient. This wasn't just about saving time. It was about increasing productivity to feed a growing population. Iron axes and saws meant forests could be cleared more easily, expanding arable land and fueling construction projects. In essence, iron was the catalyst for an economic boom that powered the Hittite Empire's expansion. The iron industry itself was a marvel of ancient engineering and ingenuity. Smelting required significant resources, not just in terms of raw materials, but also in manpower. Skilled craftsmen labored in furnaces, enduring blistering heat to produce the metal that would underpin an empire. This wasn't just a simple case of heating ore. It was a complex process involving multiple stages and considerable expertise. The Hittites' mastery of this technology gave them a strategic advantage, turning them into the Silicon Valley of the ancient world. But like any industry, it had its share of risks. Accidents were common, and the demand for labor meant that workers often toiled in harsh conditions, with safety standards that would make a modern-day factory inspector weep. So how did the Hittites keep all these pieces moving smoothly? Enter the bureaucratic juggernaut that was the Hittite administration. This wasn't a system held together by spit and hopes. It was a well-oiled machine, with officials overseeing everything from tax collection to public works. The king, at the top of the pyramid, delegated authority to regional governors who ensured his edicts were followed to the letter. This was a world where paperwork wasn't just a necessary evil. It was the lifeblood of the state. Inscriptions and tablets were the equivalent of memos and emails, ensuring everyone was on the same page, or at least trying to be. But of course, bureaucracy isn't all sunshine and efficient governance. The Hittite system could be as cumbersome as a camel through the eye of a needle. Corruption and inefficiency were constant threats, with officials sometimes more interested in lining their own pockets than serving the state. Navigating this labyrinth of red tape required not just skill, but also a healthy dose of cunning, a bit like playing a game of snakes and ladders, where the snakes had fangs. And speaking of snakes, let's debunk some myths surrounding the Hittite legal system. Romanticized views painted as a model of fairness and justice, but the truth was a tad more brutal. The Hittites were big on laws, more than 200 of them, covering everything from theft to sorcery. But justice wasn't blind. It was a little myopic, often swayed by status and influence. Punishments could be severe, with fines, enslavement, or even death meted out for offenses. And while the famous eye for an eye principle gets a lot of airtime, the reality was more about maintaining order than fairness. So, as we peel back the layers of Hittite society, it's clear that this wasn't just an empire of iron and chariots. It was a complex, multifaceted civilization that thrived on innovation and adaptability. From the farmer's plow to the merchant's caravan, the scribe's tablet to the priest's altar, every element played its part. The Hittites remind us that history is rarely as simple as it seems, and that the real story is often buried beneath the legends. As we continue to explore this fascinating empire, let's keep unraveling the truths that lie beneath the myth, because the past, much like iron, is forged in the fires of reality. Now, let's pivot from the nuts and bolts of Hittite society to something with a little more flair, their cultural achievements. Because, believe it or not, the Hittites weren't just a bunch of iron-wielding juggernauts. They were also cultural magpies, picking up shining bits of art, architecture, and diplomacy from their neighbors, and weaving them into something distinctly their own. First off, Hittite art might not have the immediate brand recognition of, say, an Egyptian sarcophagus or a Grecian urn, but don't let that fool you. These folks knew how to carve a mean relief. Step into Harusa, their capital, and you find the walls adorned with intricate carvings, each telling a story as rich as any Netflix series. One of their crowning glories was the frieze at Yazilikaya, a rock sanctuary that served as a kind of open-air temple. Imagine a procession of deities marching across the stone, a cosmic catwalk, if you will. These carvings weren't just decorative. They were a visual narrative of the Hittite world, from gods to kings, etched into eternity. And speaking of gods, the Hittites were as polytheistic as they come, with a pantheon that makes the Avengers look like a minimalist ensemble. They didn't just borrow deities from their neighbors. They adopted them like stray cats, giving them a place in their religious tapestry. This wasn't just about divine protection, it was diplomacy with a celestial twist. By incorporating foreign gods, the Hittites could smooth over relations with subjugated peoples, offering a kind of divine détente. It was like saying, we may have conquered you, but hey, your gods are now our gods, so we're practically family. Now, let's talk architecture. The Hittites were no strangers to monumental building projects. Sure, they borrowed heavily from Mesopotamian and Anatolian styles, but they put their own spin on things. Take their fortifications, for example. Harusa wasn't just a city, it was a fortress with walls that could make even the Great Wall of China feel a tad insecure. These weren't just chunky blocks of stone. They were an engineering marvel, complete with watchtowers, gates, and even underground tunnels for quick getaways or surprise attacks. Some might call that paranoid, others would call it strategic genius. But the Hittites didn't just build for defense. They were also fond of the grandiose when it came to temples and palaces. One standout was the great temple of Harusa, dedicated to the storm god, Tesub, and the sun goddess, Hepat. This wasn't just a place of worship. It was a statement piece, sprawling over 2 hectares, and complete with storerooms, workshops, and courtyards. Think of it as a combination of the Vatican and the Pentagon, serving both divine and administrative purposes. It was the kind of place where a priest might offer a sacrifice 1 minute and tally grain stores the next. Of course, it wasn't all about stone and mortar. The Hittites were also pioneers in diplomacy, a fact often glossed over in favor of their martial exploits. But make no mistake, these guys could negotiate with the best of them. The Treaty of Kadesh, signed with Egypt after the famous battle, is a testament to their diplomatic savvy. This wasn't just a peace treaty. It was a carefully worded document, written in Akkadian, the lingua franca of diplomacy, outlining terms that both parties could live with. It marked one of the earliest known examples of a written international treaty, complete with clauses that wouldn't look out of place in a modern contract. And let's not forget their legal system, which, while not exactly a beacon of fairness, was surprisingly progressive for its time. They had a knack for codifying laws, creating a legal framework that touched on everything from property rights to criminal justice. The Hittite laws weren't just a free-for-all of medieval justice. They included fines and reparations in a system that sought to maintain social order. Sure, there were some draconian measures, death for horse theft, anyone. But there was also a recognition of nuance, with penalties often adjusted based on intent and circumstances. Now, let's tackle the myth of the Hittites as mere imitators. Sure, they borrowed from their neighbors, who didn't. But they didn't just copy and paste. Oh no, they edited, revised, and added their own footnotes. The Hittites were innovators in their own right, blending influences into a unique cultural brew. Their ability to absorb and adapt was a strength, not a weakness. Think of them as the remix artists of their age, taking the best bits of surrounding cultures and creating something new and distinctive. In literature, for example, the Hittites took stories and myths from Mesopotamia and recontextualized them, adding local flavor and nuance. The Epic of Gilgamesh found its way into Hittite libraries, but not as a dusty relic. It was studied, translated, and adapted, an ancient bestseller with a Hittite twist. This wasn't plagiarism, it was cultural cross-pollination, the kind of exchange that has driven human progress for millennia. In the end, the Hittites were not just a footnote in the grand narrative of history. They were a complex, multifaceted civilization that, despite their penchant for borrowing ideas, left a legacy that would influence future empires. Their art, architecture, and diplomacy were not mere imitations, but innovations that stood the test of time. So next time someone suggests the Hittites were just riding the coattails of their more famous neighbors, remind them that history is rarely that simple. The Hittites weren't just playing the game, they were reshaping it, one iron ingot, one treaty, and one carved relief at a time. As we draw the curtain on the Hittite Empire, it's tempting to imagine their decline as a grand finale filled with drama and intrigue. Well, grab your popcorn, because this isn't just a simple exit stage left. It's a full-blown epic, complete with internal strife, external pressures, and enough chaos to make a Shakespearean tragedy look like a rom-com. First up, let's talk about the internal strife. Around 1200 BCE, the wheels started to come off the Hittite chariot. The empire was like a giant game of Jenga. One wrong move, and the whole thing could come crashing down. The problem? A series of less-than-stellar kings whose reigns were marked by infighting and power struggles that would rival any soap opera. These rulers weren't exactly the sharpest iron blades in the armory. They faced rebellions from vassals who were tired of playing second fiddle. And it turns out, a kingdom divided is a kingdom on the fast track to collapse. Now, add to that a sprinkle of economic woes. The Hittite economy, once as robust as a well-forged sword, was starting to show cracks. Remember those iron chariots we gushed about? Well, they don't come cheap, and neither does maintaining an empire. The cost of war and the need to feed an ever-growing population stretched resources thinner than a royal banquet's last slice of mutton. Add to that a few bad harvests, and you've got a recipe for disaster. It's like running a startup on a shoestring budget while trying to fend off hostile takeovers. Financial ruin was inevitable. Speaking of hostile takeovers, let's not forget the external pressures. The Sea Peoples, a mysterious confederation of marauders, were like the rock band on tour, loud, chaotic, and leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Around 1178 BCE, they decided to make a pit stop in the Hittite Empire. And let's just say they weren't there for the sightseeing. These invaders, along with other external threats like the Assyrians, turned the Hittite territories into a battleground, picking apart the empire like vultures over a carcass. But wait, there's more. Nature, it seems, also had a bone to pick with the Hittites. Evidence of climate change, yes, even back then, suggests a period of severe drought that crippled agriculture. The Anatolian breadbasket turned into a dust bowl, and famine loomed like an unwelcome guest at a feast. Without food, an empire can't sustain its population or its army. It's a harsh reminder that even the mightiest of empires are at the mercy of Mother Nature, who, let's face it, can be a real diva when she wants to be. Now, let's bust a few myths about the Hittite collapse. The romanticized view often paints their fall as a noble struggle against overwhelming odds, but the reality is a bit more mundane. It was less about heroic last stands, and more about a slow unraveling as the fabric of their society frayed at every seam. Sure, there were battles and betrayals, but much of the decline was due to bureaucratic inefficiencies and a leadership that couldn't adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. In essence, it wasn't a spectacular fall from grace. It was death by 1,000 cuts. So, what lessons can modern empires glean from the Hittite saga? For one, adaptability is key. Stagnation is the silent killer of civilizations. The Hittites were pioneers when they embraced iron, but they failed to innovate beyond that. In a world constantly in flux, resting on your laurels is a one-way ticket to obsolescence. Second, internal cohesion is just as important as external defense. An empire is only as strong as its unity, and the Hittites learned this the hard way when internal divisions paved the way for external conquest. And finally, let's not underestimate the impact of environmental factors. The Hittites, like many before and after them, found themselves at the mercy of climate and geography. Modern parallels abound. Just look at today's discussions on climate change and resource management. The fall of the Hittite Empire serves as a cautionary tale that even the most powerful civilizations are not immune to the forces of nature. So, why does the tale of the Hittites still matter today? Well, beyond the iron and the intrigue, their story is a reminder that history is a complex tapestry of human ambition, innovation, and folly. The Hittites weren't just ancient relics. They were dynamic, flawed, and remarkably human. Their rise and fall are a testament to both the incredible potential and the inherent fragility of empires. In a world where history often repeats itself, their story is a compelling chapter that echoes down through the ages. In the end, the Hittite Empire may have crumbled, but their legacy endures, etched in stone, written in treaties, and woven into the fabric of history. And as we sit here, contemplating their story, it's clear that the Hittites have left us with more than just ancient ruins. They've given us insights into the timeless dance of power and survival, a dance that continues to this day. So let's raise a metaphorical glass to the Hittites, Iron Age pioneers who remind us that the past, much like the future, is a journey of discovery, fraught with challenges and ripe with opportunity. Cheers to them, for showing us that even in the twilight, there's a story worth telling.